What's love got to do? Got to do with it. Love has everything to do with it today. Hello, everyone, and a huge welcome to the Philosophy of Love and Relationships. I'm your co host, Casey Pierce, and we are thrilled that you are joining us for this virtual conference. Over the next few hours, we'll be exploring where ancient philosophy meets modern psychology, all to help us foster and navigate healthy connections, preserve our values, and establish healthy boundaries in our lives and relationships. I'm joined by my wonderful co host and co author, Dr. Scott Waltman. Scott, why don't you say a few words?
I am so excited about today. I've been looking forward to this like Christmas. So this is we designed what do we want to learn about, and so it's very selfish. We're so excited. We have a great assortment of people, right? So we have people who study the classicists, right? So we have people who are taking a deep dive into the early philosophy. What do we learn from that? We have modern clinicians. We have everything from Seneca to schema therapy. This is going to be a fantastic 3D look. I'm very excited about this. Let's go to get started.
Yes.
We got a lot to cover.
So exciting. One thing to note is that Dr. Gregory Sadler, who will be on later, has provided a handout for his talk. It's not necessary, but it's a nice take home about Aristotle and the three types of friendship. Now, you can find that link on the Eventbrite page in the About This section, just beneath where it says hosted by. It is not necessary to have, but like I said, it's a nice take home. Also, our CEO and my husband, Donald Robertson, will be moderating in the chat. It's about love, guys. So be nice to each other. Uh, Scott, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm so excited. I mean, we'll have time at the end for some like discussion to kind of pull it all together. What I love about these conferences is the comment section. Feel free to jump in, right? Feel free to add some comments, some thoughts, some questions. If people will join in with you, it'll be a good time.
Yes, absolutely. All right, let's get the talk started. To kick things off, I would like to welcome Dr. Liz Gloyn. Dr. Gloyn is a reader in Latin language and literature at Royal Holloway University of London and is the author of The Ethics of the Family and Seneca and Tracking Classical Monsters in Popular Culture. Her talk asks, does Seneca's relationship advice still work in the 21st century? Dr. Gloyn, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Casey, and thank you very much to Casey and Scott for all they've done to get today up and running. It's a real pleasure to be with you wherever you are in the world, and thank you to the Pledges Academy team for making everything fit together so smoothly today. So my talk is going to focus today on a text written by a man called Seneca in the 1st century AD. Just to put him in a little bit of context, he had a fascinating political career as the Emperor Nero's tutor, and then he also carried on alongside that, being sort of a political figure. He had a sort of a massively big intellectual life parallel to it. So he was so influential that people faked letters between him and St. Paul, because even if those letters hadn't actually existed, they really ought to have done. This is the level of thinker that we're dealing with. He left a wide range of writing behind him, and he wrote across an astonishingly wide range of genres. And I've just given you a little flavour of some of those on this slide. Now, the text that I'm going to talk about today is Seneca's On Marriage. Now, this is quite a tricky text to engage with because we only have fragments of it preserved as quotations or paraphrases in an essay by St. Jerome, captually called Against Jovinianus. So this was written during the times of the early church fathers, where people wrote lots of texts arguing with each other. And it's a text that's thinking about the relative virtues of virginity and marriage. Now, Jerome is very much on the side of the virginity. He wants Seneca to be on his side, and so he makes out that that is Seneca's position in this text, which, when you look at what he actually says, is sort of kind of not quite what's going on. So we have to do some excavation work to see what Seneca was actually getting at in the context of what we know about his thought elsewhere. That said, we can say a few things about the fragments. So Seneca is taking part in a conversation about marriage that we know was underway during the 1st century AD, and that seems to be set in the very broad framework of the idea that marriage is what the Stoics would have called secundum naturam, It's a little phrase they use that means in accordance with nature. And this draws on the core Stoic idea that the world had been ordered in the best possible way by a divine force. So to act in accordance with nature was the same as acting in accordance with reason, which for the Stoics is the same as acting in accordance with virtue. So if you follow the pattern that nature lays out for you, you will be doing the virtuous thing. And that feeds into wider debates around whether the Stoic sage would marry. So the sage is the figure, the ideal Stoic, who always acts in accordance with reason. The Stoics realised that this was not the normal situation for people. There's a very famous text that says the Stoic sage is as rare as a phoenix. So please do not feel you're meant to have achieved sagedom. Hardly anybody did. But the sage acts as sort of an idealized figure for thinking with, as in the kind of hypothetical question, would the Stoic sage marry? And then by thinking through that question through the figure of the sage, it helps people consider what it would mean to perform an act or behave in a way when you're someone who's fully internalized Stoic teachings. And we're talking about marriage in this case because marriage is the framework for long-term relationships in the Roman world. So I will talk a lot about marriage here, but what I'm going to say, I think, extends to any long-term committed relationship as well as marriage. You know, Seneca is writing in the 1st century AD, and that's just how it looks for him, but it doesn't mean that the advice is only applicable in that context. Because the other really big thing that comes out of the fragments is that Seneca is very interested in the relationship between spouses, or the two people in a relationship. How do the interpersonal dynamics of that romantic, practical, legal, that kind of relationship play out inside a Stoic framework? So my goal this afternoon is to give you a little taste of some of what that looks like and to reflect a little bit on what that means for us by looking at some of the fragments from the On Marriage. So the first fragment, they use this numbering system, V23. They're based on the man who put them into collections called Vatero. So it's V for Vatero. Don't panic, you don't need to remember it. But the first fragment that we're looking at is really helpful for understanding the position of marriage, because what it does is it frames marriage as an indifferent. The Stoics think virtue is the only thing to aim for and the only thing that's going to make you happy. And so if virtue is the only thing we're looking for, then marriage is everything else, or rather, not just marriage, but everything is an indifferent in and of itself. What it boils down to is that getting married isn't good or bad in and of itself. There's no difference. What matters is the person that you marry. And marriage isn't going to work with a poor quality relationship. You need somebody who is good, that is virtuous, to enable a marriage that's going to function properly. Now, this is written about wives, but it does also apply to husbands. We'll see some examples of Seneca using very explicitly that both people in the relationship of responsibilities later. It can be easy to read this fragment as being weirdly distanced. That there's sort of a distance placed between us and marriage here, and that comes from the Roman social frame. In the Roman period, marriage is primarily about property transfer. It's about sort of keeping property within the family. It's about creating heirs to pass the family down to, and so on. So there is part of this is because marriage is that strategy of continuing a household rather than necessarily a purely romantic relationship. But all the same, there are two central points that come out of this. First of all, it's the quality of the partner in the relationship that matters, not the relationship itself. And second, it's built on the idea that women and men have the same potential for virtue, so that both can do philosophy and achieve that sage-like status and be a good person in the relationship. So we have an equality of potential there, that you're going to go into marriage with somebody and both aim to get to the point of virtue. So a relationship has to be built on that equality of character, not on the idea of one partner being superior to the other. So what does Seneca say about how you behave within a relationship? We move to our next fragment. And in this, Seneca is talking about amor, love, For the Romans, the word amor would have been really closely linked to the love poets and the kind of over-the-top romantic, really excessive gestures that they write about. And the problem that he's pinning down here is not that love is a problem, but being in love with being in love is a problem. It's that excess. The words here that he uses to describe love, so affectus and impetus, they're often associated with the Stoics by what they call the irrational emotions. The pathe is that Greek word. And that's a technical term. And it means beliefs or emotional states that are based on false beliefs. And the falseness there is about what makes you happy. So if, for instance, you believe that being in love is going to make you happy, as we already know, the Stoics think you're wrong because virtue is what's going to make you happy. So if you end up concentrating all your efforts on being in love because that's going to make you happy, that's not going to end well for you. So the Stoics believe you need to get rid of those irrational emotions, those false beliefs, and replace them with rational ones, which are based on the use of your reason. And that's what's captured in that word eudicium up there, the discernment, that you're loving with a rational framework to your relationship, not being pulled over into the excitement of the thing. I want to be really clear here that this isn't saying you should behave like you are an emotionless robot. This isn't about, sometimes people misrepresent the Stoics here as saying you need to get rid of every single emotion and just sort of behave like an automaton that's driven by cold rationality. That's not what's being got at. It's about feeling emotions rationally rather than irrationally. When you have excessive and irrational desire, when you're targeting that towards somebody you love, even within the frame of a relationship, that is the same as adultery. So there's a sense that this is disrespectful to the person who is receiving that excessive emotion. And you would only do that if you were being swept along by excessive amor, if you'd let this overtake you. And that sense of not being overtaken turns up a lot. And the next example is a lovely one. I give this to my undergraduates, and there's always a bit of a laugh about this distinguished man who used to bind up his chest with his wife's fascia, and then always had to drink from the same cup, and always had to be close together. And I believe this is now called public displays of affection. So a fascia is a breastband. It's a bit like an ancient bra. Pliny the Elder tells us that they cure headaches as a useful side effect. Affectus, which comes later, that sense of burning affectus as being negative, just like the previous fragment, is a Stoic code word meaning excessive or irrational emotion. So there's a difference between an honourable love and one which has become shameful, that's been overtaken by this irrational desire. So there's a really good example of what getting rid of these irrational emotions looks like. It's not that you don't feel affection for your spouse, of course you do, but it doesn't become obsessive and all-consuming, so you do silly Latin elegy-like things. Be in love, but be careful about the big romantic gestures. Are they really worth it? What do you compromise about the rest of your relationship if you lean into this sort of thing, which Seneca calls foolishness? What don't you see if you are focused on this kind of demonstrative affection? What might you miss about the quieter, less dramatic areas of your relationship that might need attention? In general, the fragments really emphasize the importance of taking space and reflecting on your actions. We have here a very sharp critique of people who follow their desires without thinking them through, presumably driven again by irrational excessive desire. Obviously, we're being given a very hyperbolic situation here, but the emphasis is on the speed of action, of performing a thing without having thought through it first. What makes you decide to get married and divorced that quickly? What kinds of things motivate you? Of course, sexual desire is one option. Also, the possibility of being motivated by money, by inheritance, by all other things. And it's the speed, quickly displeased and quickly pleased. It's the speed that's the problem, of not engaging in reflection and thinking through decisions in relationships. And that comes back to our first fragment about marriage not being good or bad in and of itself. If you are going to make the commitment to a relationship, it needs to be thought through and solid. So that when your relationship encounters reality, when those decisions encounter reality, they survive the impact. In the two hypothetical cases we've just seen, that clearly doesn't happen. And it's important to note that that is something that is expected of both people in the relationship. And this final fragment is a stinging indictment of sexual double standards. It picks up on people who marry after having an adulterous affair and the ridiculous of expecting pudicitia when you've broken it. Now, pudicitia is a bit difficult to translate, which is why I haven't had a go. But in this case, it's sort of around modesty and sort of sexual faithfulness and all of those kinds of things. So if by sort of taking somebody out of a relationship through adultery, you have broken their pudicitia. If in a marriage you then expect somebody to perform it when you've already taught them the fierce. And the key idea here is that a marriage that is based on vice rather than on virtue doesn't stand a chance. So some concluding thoughts. Does Seneca's relationship advice still work? Obviously, we live in a very different world. We can't transpose it over wholesale. We also have to be careful not to misunderstand the central elements of Stoic thought around getting rid of irrational beliefs and believe that that means the Stoics want us to be without any emotional inner life at all, which is not the case. The valuable things I think we can take from Seneca are the importance of mutual respect. Both partners bring a valuable contribution to a marriage, both need to be nurtured, and both can flourish in that space or be damaged by it. If you're in a relationship, you have a duty to respect the other person and seek their flourishing. I think it's also really helpful for showing us the importance of focusing on the quality of the relationship and not getting caught up on falling in love with falling in love. Not getting pulled into sort of the grand romantic gesture that then isn't followed up with anything else, but keeping the focus on the quality of relationship rather than the outward manifestations of the relationship. So I'm going to finish there. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you've given you plenty of food for thought to start this event.
Dr. Goin, thanks so much. I really enjoyed that. I love this kind of emphasis on not so much looking for someone who is going to complete you in some kind of codependent kind of way.
Absolutely.
Looking for someone you can grow together with, and this kind of
Exactly.
perfect, lovely. The context, love. Oh my God! I wish we had more time for it. This is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker. So we have a talk from Dr. Helen Marie, who is a UK-based trauma therapist. She has a very popular book called Choose You. She also has a very popular Instagram account, which is very relatable content. I follow it. She's wise, she's kind, she's gentle. We're excited to have her. She has a very timely question, which she's speaking to, right? So the question that she's speaking to is the current culture of boundaries damaging the art of connection? So stay tuned. Let's see what she has to say
Today, and I'd like to thank Scott Waltman and Casey Robertson for inviting me to speak. I'm excited to talk to you about something that I feel needs more conversation within the mental health sphere, and that is around the subject of, is current modern boundary culture actually damaging the art of connection? We live in a moment where the language of boundaries is everywhere, and this is a beautiful thing in so many ways. For too long, people were taught to sacrifice themselves for the comfort of others, to ignore their own limits, to ignore their own needs, just to keep the peace. I've seen this in my own community and in my private practice, the fallout from it, the chronic nervous system dysregulation, as people live in people-pleasing states, anxiety, depression, overwhelm, burnout, and a loss of that sense of self. The wonderful impact of boundaries being so popular in today's culture is that they give us permission to care for ourselves, and that's wonderful. They hold space for our needs, and they allow us to step out of any of our relationships that actually feel unsafe. But here's the paradox. In our rightful effort to protect ourselves, we sometimes swing so far towards self-protection that we lose something equally vital, the art of connection. Human relationships are built not just on respect for each other's limits, but on the messy, imperfect dance of closeness, misunderstanding, rupture, and repair. If our boundaries become impenetrable walls, we risk cutting ourselves off from the intimacy that comes when we work through conflict and, so importantly, grow together. We need spaces where it's safe to say, "That hurt me," and hear back, "I'm sorry, I'll try again." I wonder how your nervous system felt when you just heard me say that. The safety of someone saying, "It's safe to be vulnerable. It's safe for us to try and repair this." Connection thrives not in flawless interactions, but in the willingness to return to one another again when things go wrong. Current boundary culture often has people reacting from their fight or flight mode instead of responding from a grounded, safe state. We're seeing more isolation and estrangement than ever in our private practices and in therapy over here. And actually, I know that you're seeing it across the world too. It isn't sustainable for our mental health. Humans need other humans. We are relational beings. But this tension between self-protection and connection isn't new. Philosophers have wrestled with this concept for centuries. Aristotle called us social animals, argued that friendship is essential for us to flourish, but that friendship requires risk, vulnerability, mutual reciprocal engagement. If we are always guarding ourselves behind walls, we can't practice what makes life meaningful. Plato, too, saw connection as a path to wisdom. He spoke about moral intimacy, about intellectual exchange, about allowing the other to change us. And jumping forward to the last century, the work of Martin Buber with his I, thou, I, it relationships. I, thou being that moment of beautiful, genuine connection where we see the other and we're seen by the other. But when connection becomes overregulated by this intense fear of self-protection, it slips into what Buber calls that I, it, where the other becomes an object, a transaction, a checkbox even. Even the recent research, I'm not sure when it was now, but the recent research, the Harvard Happiness Study, it showed how our longevity and happiness are directly impacted by the health of the relationships in our lives. Modern boundary culture has, of course, helped so many. We've named things that once went unnamed: emotional abuse, gaslighting, narcissism, toxic dynamics. We've learned that saying no is a form of self-respect. But there is a shadow side. As we've grown fluent in the language of boundaries, we've sometimes forgotten the language of repair. Humans aren't perfect. None of us are. Rupture and repair is a beautiful rhythm to hold. Ruptures happen, yes, but the beauty is in the repair work, in the willingness to lean toward another with vulnerability, to reconnect. I think we're losing that. And if we look at this through an attachment theory lens, this overprotection of the self can lead us to an avoidant attachment. So instead of self-soothing by reaching out, we self-soothe on our own. We've learned how to say, "That's my boundary," but fewer of us know how to say, "Let's find our way back to each other." I want to move now to the science of connection, so a little bit away from the art, beautifully highlighted by Stephen Porges' work on the polyvagal theory. As Porges explains, boundaries alone don't heal us. Safe connection does. Our nervous system is constantly scanning for cues of safety. Am I safe? It asks us over and over again. When we feel safe, our ventral vagal system, the branch of the vagus nerve where we feel safer, that is protective, feels safe in our world. We can make eye contact. We can soften our tone. We can listen with empathy. And so importantly, we can co-regulate. When we feel unsafe, our system shifts into survival. We go into that fight, flight. We disconnect emotionally, physically, and relationally. And here's the key insight. Yes, boundaries can keep us safe, but they cannot regulate us. Only safe connection can do that. So co-regulation, the process of soothing and being soothed by another, it's often the missing link in modern healing. I find this in my work time and time again. It's how infants develop secure attachment. It's how adults recover after trauma. It's how communities mend and heal after conflict. We need to look towards togetherness and how to protect that togetherness. Boundary culture often prizes emotional self-sufficiency so highly that we forget that the nervous system evolved to heal together. When someone says, I need space, yes, respect that space, but remember that attunement is still possible. Imagine this. We could say, I'm here when you're ready, when you need space. I'm here if you need space. I'm here and I care about this connection. Safety is never about the absence of others. It's the presence of safe others. So if boundaries protect us, it is co-regulation that heals us. We're losing it. We're losing the art of co-regulation. We are living through what so many psychologists call a connection crisis. We are becoming such lonely beings. We scroll through screens, we curate identities, and sometimes we confuse boundaries with emotional withdrawal. If connection is a muscle, many of us have stopped knowing how to exercise it. We've forgotten how to stay in a room when things get hard. We've forgotten how to apologize, how to repair. Talking about boundaries more here, I'm reflecting on a personal boundary that I witnessed as a metaphor. I was very lucky to be in Paris and to be at the Louvre and to visit the Mona Lisa. It's crowded there. It's incredibly busy. There are beautiful velvet ropes around the Mona Lisa, acting as a boundary, and the crowds are behind it, all pushing and bustling to see the beautiful, beautiful painting. The ropes are there, the boundary is there, but you can still feel the energy of the painting. You can still be part of that experience. But I thought this whole experience would be really different if the Mona Lisa was sealed behind a thick glass wall. Yes, I might still have been able to see it, but I would have lost that living exchange of being in the presence of that beautiful piece of work. So boundaries that don't lead us back to that connection, that don't allow that space for connection, risk becoming prisons of our own making. The art of repair, of coming back after rupture, of sharing space again with another human being, that's what keeps the art of connection, of human connection, alive. We are wired for co-regulation. In my private practice, I often see couples find each other again only when they discover how to connect again. We saw this through COVID as well. So many of my clients struggling with their mental health due to isolation, but these symptoms disappeared once they were able to connect again. We need others, safe others, to feel safe. Boundaries alone can't offer that. They can become rules. But boundaries held in that beautiful service of connection that are flexible, compassionate, alive, they can offer connection. Boundaries are vital and they are so important. But if they are overemphasized, they can turn safety into isolation. So maybe remember that our boundaries are meant to be bridges, never walls. That connection is not the opposite of safety, but it's its deepest expression. So the question I would like to leave you all with as I finish this presentation is, are our boundaries protecting us or preventing us from healing? Thank you so much.
That was great. That was great. Oh, Casey, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just saying that was absolutely wonderful. And boundaries are often misunderstood. We talked about this very thing in the Stoicism workbook. It's not necessarily like an attack. It's not calling a foul. It's just
Mhm.
stating this is what I need.
Right. Boundaries aren't a way to control other people. They're a way to set limits to be able to have like a healthy relationship. Bridges, not walls. I love that metaphor. That's
Yes,
fantastic.
yes. And Dr. Helen Marie, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Our next speaker is Dr. Jeff Perron. Dr. Perron is a clinical psychologist trained in CBT and schema therapy, specializing in helping individuals overcome depression and anxiety and align their lives with personal values. He shares insights and practical guides at the Psychology of Happiness, very popular Substack. He's here today to help us with understanding schemas in love and relationships. Dr. Perron, you have the floor. Jeff, I can't hear you. There we are, I think.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Beautiful. Okay, perfect. That's it's going to be important that you can hear me, or you're not going to get too much from this presentation. Although hopefully I've got some nice images in my slides. So bear with me 1 second while I just pull those up. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see my slides. Just give me the bat signal, somebody, if you can't. So like Casey mentioned, I'm Dr. Jeff Perron. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm a schema therapy guy, a CBT guy. So CBT is like the big umbrella under which I practice and my colleagues practice. And me specifically identify most with schema therapy. So I'm going to start by talking about, what are schemas and how do they factor into our understanding of our relationships, particularly our romantic relationships. So our schemas are kind of like the rules or the roadmap that we learn for navigating the world. They are our understanding of ourselves, other people, and our place in the world. So what you're looking at in the middle of the screen, this triangle, that's kind of like the base CBT model, right? So CBT at its simplest level, cognitive behavioral therapy, says, if in doubt, look at the relationship between your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors. And historically speaking, there's actually a through line from folks like Socrates to modern day CBT. From it kind of goes rational emotive behavioral therapy, which was heavily informed by Stoicism, explicitly informed by Stoicism, to CBT, and then multiple offshoots of modern CBT, one of which is schema therapy. And so you've got this CBT triad in the middle, and what schema therapy adds above and beyond this is a recognition that we don't just have random thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, but we have patterns of thinking, emoting, and behaving. I think that perhaps the most important thing about schema therapy is the attachment lens that it brings to understanding our specific unique patterns. So if we start with the assumption, I don't think it's an assumption, I think it's very clear biologically that we have a need for a secure base, a secure attachment with initially our parents, right? You think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, we could get by if we just have some food and a little bit of shelter and some safety. But as far as developing optimally, we really need to have a secure, reliable attachment figure that we can attach to and that serves as our safe base for exploring the world. And so, like it or not, we carry this attachment wiring with us forward from childhood into our adult relationships. And so our schemas kind of factor in because we learn that there are certain ways that we can get our attachment needs met, including keeping ourselves safe or getting approval from the people around us. And I'll give you a quick example. So one really prominent schema, particularly amongst folks I see, and particularly amongst folks who attend workshops on their Saturday, is the unrelenting standards schema. So this is it's never quite good enough schema. And so folks with this schema, and definitely not me, I'm not talking about myself here, but we kind of sort of learn that to get approval or attachment or rewards or recognition in life, if we can kind of like suppress our own needs and pursue really high standards or expectations, that other people might reward that. Either we get the pat on the back from the parent or the coach or the gold star from the teacher. So you can kind of think of unrelenting standards as a roundabout way for keeping yourself safe, like avoiding harsh judgment and getting certain attachment needs met, like approval from the people around you. So I'm going to skip one slide, which I'll hopefully have a chance to come back to, time permitting, and jump into this infinity loop cycle image. And so what you're looking at, if I take a step back, so far we've covered this idea that we all have attachment needs. Then we all have schemas that kind of sort of serve to get our attachment needs met. And for some of us, our schemas are going to do a better job than for others at getting those needs met. And then we enter into a relationship with another human being, and that person has attachment needs and schemas, and we've got our attachment needs and schemas. And the resulting pattern of interaction could be a beautiful dance, as the emotion-focused therapy folks would say. Right? So this infinity loop doesn't have to be all bad. Or if the patterns of interaction stemming from your schemas really don't do a good job of getting the partner's attachment needs met, that's when you kind of get into this doom spiral of oblivion, if I can use a technical term. So don't worry too much about all the moving pieces of this graphic, because I want to give you what is maybe the most concrete part of this presentation, and something hopefully you can take with you into your own relationships, whether that's romantic relationships or even friendships. You think of this kind of fill in the blank exercise, and this is from Dr. Sue Johnson's book, Hold Me Tight. We kind of fill in the blanks here. The more I A, the more you B, and then the more I C, and round we go. This is kind of a way of figuring out the pattern that you get into with your partner. And the most common troubling type of pattern is what's often called the pursue withdraw pattern, or the demand withdraw pattern. And so that looks something like, if you fill in the blanks, the more I pursue your affection, the more you withdraw and pull away, and then the more desperate I become, and round we go. Of course, couples, when they're struggling, aren't necessarily able to put this together, right? And we're filling in the blanks here, but oftentimes the blanks are things like, you're not warm enough, you're cold, you don't open up enough, or you're messy, or you're unreliable, right? These things, these maybe standards or expectations that we might put on our partner that kind of sort of feel like they're supposed to get our needs met, but doesn't necessarily work, because what we actually need to have met is our attachment needs, in that sense of safety, security, and knowing that our partner is there with us. So if we agree that we have attachment needs, we have schemas, our schemas don't necessarily do a great job, may or may not do a great job of getting our needs met with our partner, it's like, okay, well, how do we avoid the infinity doom spiral and instead talk directly about our attachment needs? And so at the highest level, this has two steps: the fears part and the needs part. So these next couple of slides, hopefully I can give you something that you can take away into your relationships if you feel that you're ever entering that spiral. And this can be, this doesn't mean it's a relationship that's in trouble. This is useful. I use this, and use this sounds a bit strange perhaps, but in conversations with my wife, if we're spinning and talking about something, whatever that may be, one of us annoys each other for something, and then we start talking about that thing and why it's bothering us, et cetera, et cetera. It's so useful to be able to pause that cycle and say, well, like, wait a second, we're, clearly we're just getting off into oblivion here. This is not going to result in a nice resolution, and bring it back to, okay, like, what am I actually afraid of here? And what do I actually need? And by the way, this is a two-way street, right? If when a client says to me, like, if I could just get my partner to change their ways, it's we got to stop there, because both individuals have to play a role in identifying their fears and identifying their needs in order to create that felt sense of a secure base. And so what does that actually look like? What am I most afraid of? This is the fears part. It's not that you're messy, or you're not going to come home on time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's things like, I'm afraid you'll abandon me. I'm afraid you won't be there when it really counts. I'm afraid you don't love me unconditionally. I'm afraid you'll see me as a failure. And so if you can zone in on these underlying needs, these attachment needs, and come off of like whatever thing feels important in the moment that doesn't actually get at the attachment needs, then you're in the right ballpark. So that's part one. Part two is then being able to say, what do I need most from you? Again, it's not, I need you to take out the garbage Wednesday morning by 8 o'clock every day. That's not it. It's something underlying that, which is often a felt sense of, are you there? Are you with me? Are we in this together? Are we on the same page? And so you can think about these conversations, yes, as having two parts. You know, what are my fears? What are my needs? And if you can layer in accessibility, responsiveness, and being engaged with your partner in that dance, as messy as it may feel at times, then you're on the right track to creating that felt sense of security and a safe base. And so I'm going to double back to my monkey slide here, because I think the risk, or at least the rebuttal to some of this, is this is fluff. Like, okay, this is nice. Yes, I'm sure it's wonderful if you can create this sense, but like, you know, I work really hard and I take care of the kids, and like, what else do you want from me? I'm sorry if I can't make you feel warm and fuzzy all the time. And that's a problem, because these things are not, unfortunately, not just warm and fuzzies. These are more or less biological imperatives. And so if we can trace the line of research back, probably the most striking finding in this area is some of Harry Harlow's early work with rhesus monkeys. And so what you're looking at here is an image of from some of his early experiments. And what he did was take rhesus monkeys, remove them from their birth mother, and raise them with one or both of a wire surrogate, which is the image on the right. Wire surrogate, not responsive, like look at the face, it's just kind of a blank face. Or on the left, a surrogate that kind of mimics some of what we would want from a secure, responsive parent. Warm, kind of contact, comfort, fuzzy, felt, a warm face, smiling like expression, large eyes. And so, yes, as expected, there was a preference that the monkeys had to spend time with this warm, soft mother. But the real important finding is what happened to the monkeys that were raised only with the wire mother. And by the way, both mothers, I mean, the conditions varied depending on which part of the experiment we're talking about here, but the wire monkey mother would have milk. It was providing milk, so the biological needs were met. But what happened to these monkeys who were raised solely with the wire mother, the wire surrogate, is they were basically not functional socially, incredibly anxious. And when those monkeys went on to have children, they went as far as not even being able to respond to the needs of their children, to even injuring some of their children. So to me, this is clear evidence that having a safe, secure mother or attachment figure is not just a nice to have. It's really something that's critical if we're going to thrive in life. And so I will leave that with you as kind of an imperative, hopefully not too drastic, but an imperative to really build and work on that secure attachment with your partner. And hopefully I've done my job by at least giving a couple starting tangible skills. By the way, please leave me a comment if there's anything that's unclear, missing, that you'd like to hear more of. I'm going to be writing an article that summarizes some of these perspectives for Substack. So please just leave a comment in the comment section and I will check that out.
Yeah. Oh, I love that talk. That was fantastic. I mean, the Harlow's monkeys is always such like a disturbing study, but such like an important study. It leaves like that like gut punch, but you're like, oh, it's so important. But I really, really enjoy when you're talking about like relationships, couples, there be kind of this idea about there's like what we think we're fighting about and what we're really fighting about. And that's such a, I hate the term life hack, but that's such a relationship life hack. Like when you learn to slow down and say, what are we really talking about here? Like why am I so mad about coffee? This doesn't make any sense. And then stepping into what's really going on, absolutely a way to make things much better. I appreciate it. I look forward to reading this article on your Substack. I'm a big fan. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. All right, so I have the pleasure of introducing our next session. It's a recorded session by Dr. Corey Gleed and Anna White. Dr. Gleed is a New York City clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Anna White is an ex-Wall Street executive turned advocate after experiencing chronic burnout. They co-founded a podcast called the Type C Personality Podcast. They're going to talk more about what is Type C. You might be wondering, what is that? What is that? How is it relevant to the topic we're at today? Fascinating stuff. Hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Dr. Corey Gleed, a clinical psychologist.
And I'm Anna White. I worked in investments and finance for about 20 years.
We created the Type C Personality Project. It's a blog, an Instagram, and a podcast.
And a book, which we are publishing in May 2027. It's called The Empowered Type C.
We're so excited to be here today. Most people have heard of Type A and Type B, but there is also a Type C, which people don't know about. We really want to raise awareness of Type C because it can have a significant effect on your relationships with partners, family, friends, and colleagues.
You might not be Type C, but we are 99% sure that someone in your orbit is, and a better understanding of each other can bring more harmony to our relationships, which is, of course, why we're here today and what we're all looking for.
So what is Type C? They are people who are over-accommodating, over-compromising, and excessively nice. They find disappointing other people unbearable. They give way too much of themselves to others, and they hate conflict and avoid it at all costs.
Type Cs are always pleasant. They don't tell people how they really feel because they often don't even know themselves. And this everything is fine mentality can keep them stuck in terrible relationships or jobs and suffering in silence.
Many Type C people struggle with feeling lesser, like everyone else is more important. They feel powerless, and they can even feel hopeless.
I came across this concept of Type C in a health and wellness book and had a eureka moment. It described me to a T, and I couldn't believe I had never heard of it before. It explained so many of my health issues, my relationship struggles. I brought it up with Corey, my longtime friend, at dinner one night.
And it just resonated so much with me. It describes so many of my patients. So where does it come from? How does it develop? Usually there were difficult childhood dynamics that played a part. As kids, Type C people developed deeply ingrained beliefs that their needs were not important. They were in situations where they learned to suppress their own needs and feelings.
This could have happened from invalidation, from abuse, emotionally immature parents, or excessive perfectionism. Or maybe a parent or sibling had mental or physical health issues. Maybe there were violent or overly emotional outbursts in the home, and these Type C kids felt like they had to keep the peace.
Caregivers might have been carrying heavy burdens like serious financial issues, and children felt like expressing emotions would just be another burden. Often they had to be hypervigilant, always reading the room, reading the emotions of caregivers or siblings or others close to them.
Now that Type Cs are older, these beliefs are not useful, they're not productive, but they are very, very sticky, and they can create all sorts of issues in relationships.
These issues arise because Type C people are often not aware of how they really feel. They are sitting on layers of buried emotion. They are not in touch with anger, and they can't tolerate feeling guilt.
They're avoiding conflict, so they don't communicate directly and clearly. They might expect people to read their minds.
When you can't engage in conflict and you're not saying how you really feel and you can't push back on someone or fight for yourself, the big R will build up: resentment.
It's no secret that resentment is toxic in relationships. We had a couples therapist on our podcast a few years back, and one of his quotes really stuck with me: "Nothing kills desire like resentment." So in romantic relationships, this is obviously a huge problem. And it's a big problem in friendships and work relationships also.
So for our book, we interviewed a number of Type C people about their own struggles. One woman talked about how conflict avoidant she was in her marriage. Growing up, she witnessed some pretty violent fights between her parents, and now she feels very triggered by conflict. She says her husband tries to have conversations with her, but she just can't do it. She shuts down and she hides.
It's creating problems in their marriage. They have 2 small children,
and a serious imbalance on the domestic labor front. This is super common. She ends up doing a lot of the housework, and because she can't speak up and ask for help, she feels so guilty about burdening her husband. She knows all of this is really unhealthy, but she doesn't know how to change. When you're avoiding having these conversations and you can't say the thing that needs to be said, your relationships can become really shallow. You coexist instead of really tuning into each other and supporting each other. Our relationships at work can be affected as well. Type C people may pile on work themselves, always saying yes to anything that's asked of them. They hate letting the team down or disappointing them in some way. I did this to the extreme. I worked straight through my maternity leave with my second child. I worked for a small, under-resourced investment firm. I felt so guilty being on leave and creating more work for my colleagues. So I offered to help out. And sure enough, the firm was asking me to help on day 2. This did not end well for me. I created a lot of health issues for myself, and it was really hard on my family. We spend a lot of time with our work colleagues, and those relationships are important. We may spend even more time with them than with our own family and friends. When we can't communicate honestly and directly and state our ideas and needs clearly, we just don't work well together. We can't be productive and creative as a team. We're too focused on how toxic the workplace is, how toxic this or that relationship is. And type C people are at a huge risk of burnout from taking on too much. And they're usually not telling their bosses the truth about this. So they get to the point where they can't take it anymore and they quit or they go on medical leave. They might sever the relationship with the company completely. Friendships can be affected also. Type Cs are usually good listeners. They're willing to give you so much of their time and energy. Friendships can end up being very one-sided. Type Cs can just feel used and taken advantage of. At the same time, Type Cs are not always genuine. They don't always say what they really think or feel, so friendships can be sort of shallow. The real connection from sharing openly and honestly isn't there. They also worry excessively about offending other people. They're very guarded in how they communicate. If you're in a relationship with Type C, it's likely that you're frustrated. You feel like you have to read their minds. You never know what they want to do, where they want to go. You have no real idea what's going on with them. They're pleasant all the time. It's nice that they never get mad at you, but your relationship is really limited. If you're a Type C, what can you do differently? How can you have healthier and deeper relationships with the people in your life, including yourself? Step 1 is the most important, and that's simply awareness. Get in touch with what's happening in your own mind. Are you operating according to a set of strict rules like, I can't let anyone down, I can't disappoint them, I can't make them mad, I have to keep the peace? These are rules that drive many Type Cs. They're operating in the background. You might not be actively thinking, I can't disappoint Corey, but that rule is in there somewhere and it's influencing your interactions with other people and yourself. The next step is commit to change. Change can be so hard for people, but if we want more fulfilling lives and relationships, we need to see that the old ways are not serving us. One of the most important skills for Type C is to learn the secrets of direct and clear communication. This will take an open mind, a willingness to experiment, and some practice. It also takes a lot of bravery. Doing things differently is always uncomfortable, but we can think of it like building a muscle. It takes effort, it takes repetition, but we come out stronger in the end. Approaching change with openness and curiosity is key. Start small and practice with people you trust. Share a low-stakes opinion, like, what do you want for dinner? It can be hard to be aware of your needs and put them out there, but be honest with yourself of the cost of not doing this on your mental and physical health over the years. Here are 2 great strategies to try out. The first one is to ask for help. Type Cs are notoriously hyper-independent. We don't delegate, we take it all on. Find a situation either at work or home to ask for a small favor. Maybe it's asking a neighbor if she could pick up something for you at the grocery store. Or maybe it's asking your spouse to take a household task that you normally do. This will feel uncomfortable. You will feel guilty. Can you sit with that guilt and let yourself feel it in the service of change? The second strategy is to use a delay tactic to say no to someone. My default has always been yes, of course. When someone asks me to do something, I don't even stop to consider how I'm going to get it done or if it's even good for me to do it. Instead of saying yes, say, can I think about that and come back to you? Delay. Buy yourself some time and then really think about whether you want to do this or not. Are there costs to doing this and what are they? Maybe doing this takes time and attention away from other things you're doing. Maybe it stretches you way too thin and comes at a cost to your health. You can always come back and say, my plate is so full right now. I would love to help, but now is not the right time. We have a lot of ways to say no on our website. We'd love for you to check that out. It's the typecpersonality.com. On our resources page, you'll find a whole list of quick phrases that you can use. We'd love for you to check out all of the parts of our project. Our podcast is called the Type C Personality Project. We have the greatest guests, and they bring such interesting perspectives to help Type C people. And our Instagram is at the Type C Personality. We post multiple times a week. And please stay tuned for our book. Also, we've been so lucky to interview all these brave people willing to share their struggles. If you are Type C, you're going to love it. And it might also be great for a Type C person in your life. We are so happy to have been invited to talk today. We hope our talk has been helpful, and we wish you all the best in making your relationships deeper and more fulfilling.
You gotta unmute yourself, Scott.
Oh, it's me. I'm back. Well,
Yes.
that
Sorry, that was
was a lot of
a
fun.
little. Yeah, that was a little clunky on the dismount. That was me. Sorry about that.
No, you're totally fine. Totally
But
fine.
yes, I really enjoyed that. It's interesting. I have a story that sort of parallels Anna's when it comes to
Mhm.
motherhood and being Type C. I was still recovering from cesarean section when I was so focused because motherhood would trigger that, that
Mhm.
perfectionism. And I should have asked for more help. And when my son was just 4 months old, I herniated a disc.
Oh my God.
And
Yeah.
my son will be 2 next month, and I'm
Mhm.
still in recovery.
Mhm.
Unreal. So you guys got to think about the cost. It doesn't hurt to say
Absolutely.
when you need help. Absolutely.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much to Dr. Corey Gliad and Anna
Mhm.
White. And we are about to go on a break. We will put up a 5-minute counter so you can use the restroom, get some water. And when we come back, we have a presentation from Scott Waltman. He
All
will
right.
be firing up the karaoke machine and singing some Olivia Newton-John for you guys.
Yeah, just some
So
self-analysis psychotherapy. Sit back.
yeah, he will be talking about stoic interconnectedness, kindness, and
Mhm.
fairness. And I'm really looking forward to it. All right, we will see you guys in 5 minutes. Oh, we are not on a break any longer. Let me take that out. There we are. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Our next speaker is one of your hosts, Dr. Scott Waltman. Scott is a co-author. He's the co-author of Socratic Questioning for Therapists and Counselors, the Stoicism Workbook, and the forthcoming The Rescuer Trap. He's the Laverne to my Shirley, my literary soulmate, and his presentation is on Stoic interconnectedness, kindness, and fairness. Dr. Scott Waltman.
Thank you. That's so kind. I appreciate that. So in 1993, the Trinidadian German singer philosopher Hathaway asked a very specific question, which is, what is love? And I think we'll be trying to answer that today. Let me pull my slides up. I'm pretty sure I know how to do this. Doing this for just a bit. Okay. I was going to have my talk on, as you know, in the spirit of Socrates, right? As we talk about something, we have to define what is it, but I couldn't do that without doing the Night at the Roxbury head movement, and it got distracting, so they asked me to stop doing any movements in general. So instead, I'm talking about Stoic interconnectedness, and what I'm trying to talk about today is largely in line with what's been coming up, this question that's been coming up in the comments, essentially of how do the Stoics view ideas of love, compassion, interconnectedness? You know, if our core virtues are wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, and none of these is the love word, is love really important? Is it something that we really care a lot about? In preparation for this talk, I was talking with, I talk with a lot of people, but I was talking with one of my colleagues who is not a Stoic, and I was explaining that I was going to be talking at a Philosophy of Love conference on the topic of Stoicism, and they were really confused by this. This would be like, I mean, like, it would be like ordering a bagel in Texas. Like, you could do it, but like, why would you do it? There's not, it's fine. We have okay bagels here, but they're not great. It's fine. We got better food. We got other things that are better. But they were confused because they thought, well, isn't Stoicism all about being like unemotional, disconnected, this like alpha man kind of energy? And I was like, how long have we been friends? I need to talk with you about this very important part of my life. So I'll be talking about kind of what does love, connection, affection look like from a Stoic perspective, and also a little bit about just like, what did I talk with my friend about? Because I feel like that's kind of candid and fun. I know we have different people from all over the world. We have some people who are really into Hellenistic philosophy and are perhaps practicing Stoics. I think we might also have some clinicians, just a smattering of folks. For anyone who is kind of new to Stoicism, if you're wondering what is Stoicism all about, especially if you were my friend that I was talking about, I might say, well, let me explain to you what Stoicism is from the perspective of modern psychotherapy. So in modern psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy and Stoicism are usually seen as pretty similar ideas. It's not exactly a one-to-one match, but modern cognitive behavioral therapy is based on Stoic philosophy. Specifically, some of the early writings of Epictetus are gospel in a sense. Of course, CBT is sort of a big tent, and within CBT, there's different parts of it. Dr. Perrin was talking about this earlier in his talk, and he said it better than I could, so I'll leave it there. In my mind, if I think about what specifically is Stoicism from a psychotherapeutic perspective, there is some degree of overlap between rational emotive behavior therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy, and that Venn diagram overlap to me is what Stoicism is. Of course, my experience is mediated through my history and my views and my perceptions. So of course, my view of Stoicism will be filtered by like who I am as a person. And maybe my view is slightly different from your view. And that's why we talk with each other, because we learn through dialogue. So rational emotive behavior therapy started as rational therapy from Albert Ellis. This is many, many years before I was even thought of this existed. The rational emotive behavior therapy is based on this idea from Epictetus that men are not bothered by things, but our views of them, right? It's not just what happens, but our interpretation is what drives our irrational or our manufactured emotions. So a big part of rational emotive behavior therapy is learning to slow down and not just talk about what's happening, but talking about my interpretation of what's happening, right? What does this mean to me? Why am I responding this way, right? I might be in the same situation as my friend, and we might have very different emotional experiences. Why is that? That's because of our history. That's because of who we are as people. We tend to see it kind of differently. Of course, these judgments that we have, we can learn them, we can unlearn them. We can learn new ways of thinking. That's a core idea of rationally motivated behavior therapy. Another core idea of rationally motivated behavior therapy is this idea that non-acceptance is the source of our suffering. So when REBT practitioners are working with someone, they're less focused on, is your thought 100% true, which is more of a Beckian kind of perspective. And they're more focused on, what demands are you making of the universe? Are you living life on life's terms? Because a lot of times we suffer when we want things to be different than they are, right? We have these external preferences that we treat as demands. And when we treat those as demands, we suffer because it's external, we can't control it. There is a big focus on increasing our distress tolerance, recognizing that life is cruel at times. And instead of wishing for life to always be nice and happy and easy, we can focus on, we have the strength to endure these things. There is this emphasis on living in harmony with nature, which was already talked about earlier today. I love that. That was fantastic, Dr. Gloin. I appreciate that. And there's also this kind of rational inquiry of recognizing that I can examine my own self-talk. On the other side of the house, we have acceptance and commitment therapy, sometimes called third wave CBT, although now we're kind of moving past the third wave, and now we're pulling it all back together with process-based CBTs and various other integrations. Acceptance and commitment therapy, you can think about it from, there's this very popular book called The Happiness Trap. And The Happiness Trap essentially frames this dilemma where we live in a world where there's so much excess and yet so much unhappiness. Or, we have, in many ways, we have more than people have ever had, and we're still wildly unhappy, and it makes no sense. And he talks about there's people who are essentially unhappy about being unhappy, where you see on like drug commercials, people just like stupidly happy, and you think, oh, I should be that happy. Why am I not that happy? And suddenly I'm unhappy because I'm not as happy as I think I should be. And there's this pitfall where we start chasing happiness as if that's supposed to be the most important thing, and we should have happiness as a product, as a status, as constant joy, constant enjoyment. Really being high is kind of like what people are really looking for in a sense. I want to always feel good and I want to never feel bad, which is a little bit what Epicureanism was about. Not all the way. I hope I didn't just start a fight. I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. But the Stoics, their response to that was essentially, the most important thing in life isn't feeling good. The most important thing in life is living good, focusing on, are you living in accordance with your values? So in acceptance and commitment therapy, we essentially redefine happiness from like a brainwashed in like dopamine and serotonin and feeling enjoyment to fulfillment and meaning. So a good life is a life that you're living in accordance with your values, which is really compatible with the Stoic idea of your virtues. In acceptance commitment therapy, they don't spend almost any time focusing on evaluating, is your thought really true? They treat that as kind of a glue trap. They have this idea about relational frame theory, and they think if you look to evaluate your thought, you might accidentally increase it. Although if anyone is like a therapy nerd, there's like a little bit of drama in the world of ACT about relational frame theory and ACT. And if you want to gossip about it, it'll be fun. But anyways, it's a different conversation. But it's more of like they use the word diffusing. So you're trying to get some distance from your thoughts. So I might have this painful story that comes up for me. Rationally motivated therapy might focus on, well, are you labeling yourself? Are you self-downing? Is this rational? Let's let go of it. On ACT, they might just say this is just noise. Like if somebody was lying to you, you wouldn't have to prove them wrong. You could just ignore it. So there's a little bit of a distancing perspective, which is definitely a straight up Stoic practice. In acceptance and commitment therapy, we would say that pain is a part of life. Pain is not optional. If you're going to be alive, you're going to feel things. If you're going to feel things, you're going to feel things you enjoy and feel things you don't enjoy. That's the way it works. But we'd say that suffering is optional. Suffering comes from pain plus non-acceptance. So when we treat our pain as something that's intolerable, we shouldn't have this. This isn't what I signed up for. I don't want this. Then we're going to have more pain. In the field of pain treatment, pain medication, pain management, the term they keep coming back to is pain catastrophizing, which is when I treat my pain as something that's intolerable, it becomes more intolerable, which is really kind of a messed up way for the body to be designed. But we suffer when we're out of accordance with nature, when we're not accepting that things are the way that they are. In acceptance and commitment therapy, there's a big focus on focusing on what you have control over. So if you were being seen like REBT versus ACT, how might treatment goals be different? So if you were being seen by like a Beckian cognitive therapist, if you were coming in for depression, my goal would be to reduce your depression. We would be measuring how depressed are you on measures. We'd be looking to see where your symptoms coming out, and I would be focusing on trying to help you be less depressed, hopefully in the goal of living a fulfilling life. In acceptance and commitment therapy, they're not really worried about is your depression worsening, and in some ways they're not even really paying attention to it. They're more saying, well, my goal isn't to lessen your depression, my goal is to help you live a more fulfilling life. Of course, outcome data wise, ACT isn't as good at decreasing distress. It is good at increasing a value-based living life. And so what you're looking for would depend on where you go. But the overlap between these two is to me is largely what Stoicism is, which is important for this question about how do the Stoics view relationships? How do they view affiliation? How do we view caring for other people? So we talked about this misnomer, right? And there's this common misnomer that comes up, which is that Stoics don't really care about other people. Stoicism has been quite popular. People, when something's popular, people find out you can make money off of it. As soon as you can make money off of it, it becomes bastardized. And so there's been this commodification of Stoicism, which has turned into this kind of like propaganda machine about like what do we think will sell really well, and what sells really well is you reach out to people's insecurities. So instead of trying to lift people up, you try to go for a vulnerability and make someone feel bad about it and try and exploit it. So there's this we call it Broicism. I'm sure no one in the Broic sphere calls it Broicism. That would involve reading. I feel so bad for saying that. That's a judgment I should let go of. I feel so bad. Oh my God. Okay, I'll talk about that later. Someone's going to talk with me later about that. I'll be in trouble. You don't have to make me in trouble. But there are these kind of like lone wolf, like strong, no feelings, don't care about anyone. You don't owe anyone kind of ideas. That's kind of said as Stoicism, but that's not actually what Stoicism really is. But it is certainly a message that's out there. It doesn't help that if you look in the dictionary of the word Stoic, right, we might talk about capital S Stoicism of philosophy, but lowercase s Stoicism might look like being unemotional, being kind of emotionally constipated, which is a different thing than what we're trying to sell. So that's a challenge. So first I have this conversation with my friend and I say, well, you know, there's kind of more than one Stoicism. There's like real Stoicism, and then there's kind of this off-brand thing that's going on. But let's get into like what is true Stoicism. And I think a good way of illustrating that is this quote from Marcus Aurelius in Meditations. For folks who are newer to Stoicism, I think the thing that I always talk about when I'm talking about meditations with my clients is Marcus at times can seem a little bit preachy, but he's writing to himself. Like he's essentially sitting down and he's not telling people like, this is how you need to live your life, like these podcasters are. He's sitting in the quiet moments and saying like, Marcus, you have so much responsibility. Do not screw it up. You are responsible for the common good. Take care of the common good. Do what really matters. And so here's Marcus in the quiet moment sitting by himself and contemplating on something really relevant to this idea about Stoicism versus Broicism, where he says, keep this thought handy when you feel a bit of rage coming on. It isn't manly to be enraged, very clear cut. Rather, gentleness and civility are more human and therefore manlier. Isn't that wild, right? So what's more human is more manly, which is interesting because sometimes we'll view like being manly as being like the alpha male and like being in charge of everyone and being like Rambo. Although like the first Rambo was pretty different from Rambo later on. And there was the writing changed. If anybody wants to have that conversation later, I'd love to. But a real person doesn't give way to anger, discontent, and such a person has strength, courage, and endurance. So it's easy to let your emotions run to drive. It's harder. It takes more endurance, more strength, more courage to lead with gentleness and lead with civility instead of leading with anger. unlike the angry and complaining. The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. So if you were to ask Marcus, like, hey, what do you think about this whole broicism thing? My hope is that he'd say, that's kind of a weird thing to emphasize, because I think they're equating this like kind of gym lifestyle with this like emotion, like this emotional disconnection, but that's there's an entire like muscle group that they're neglecting, right? It's like people, they say don't skip leg day, don't skip like emotional kindness day. You got to make sure that you're putting in the hard work to take care of yourself. So this is a lovely quote, but of course, I'm somebody who believes in, don't put up a straw man, put up an Iron Man. You got to really test your beliefs out and see if this is worth looking at. So it is possible that we could look at this and say, well, Marcus isn't necessarily advocating for love. He's advocating for civility. He's advocating for being gentle and civil and agreeable. And being nice is different than being kind, right? If you're being nice, that means you're like, things are nice and even and smooth, and you're not going to get in trouble at work for saying what you're saying, because like it seems nice and even if you're not paying attention to what's being said. And it's possible to say things that are really quite violent, but say them in a way that's really nice and seems totally fine if you're not paying attention to what's being said. So let's take a deeper look. So this is Marcus touching on the idea of what we'd call sympathia. Someone's going to correct me later. I apologize. I live in Texas and I can hardly speak English. But so the sympathia is this kind of Stoic idea of like we're all interconnected. So Marcus says, what is not good for the swarm is not good for the bee. Meaning, like, if we talked earlier today, especially Dr. Gloyden, about this idea about living in accordance with nature is living in a way that's rational, is living in a way that's virtuous. So living in accordance with nature would be recognizing that like we as humans, we need each other, right? It would be irrational to think that it's me versus you. The only reason that we have survived as a species is because we recognize that like we need to work on this together, right? There's an African proverb which says like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's essentially what Marcus is recognizing, this idea that in the grand scheme of things, like this is only going to work if this all works together. And in his seat as the emperor, he can see all the moving pieces, and even he can recognize like, I can't do this all on my own. Like I need these people, they need me. We got to work for the common good. There are lives in the balance, or there's well-being in the balance. This isn't a place to mess around. But this takes us a little bit further than just being civil, right? Because civil can be, let me say nice things and be very polite, but now we're recognizing it. There's kind of this idea about like intentions, about caring for other people in a way of recognizing like we're interconnected, right? My well-being is attached to your well-being, and your well-being is attached to my well-being. So where do we go from here, right? So in Casey was talking about our Stoicism workbook. So in our Stoicism workbook, we have a chapter on interpersonal effectiveness, and we look at the Stoic idea of justice, and we break it down to these ideas about benevolent kindness and impartial fairness, which is absolutely something Donald Robertson said before, and we kind of just like cited him on. Thanks, Donald. But benevolent kindness, it takes it a little bit further, right? So kindness, we're now moving from niceness to kindness. So kindness is caring about people. What's the difference between kindness and benevolent kindness? So benevolent kindness is kind of like not just wanting to be nice to people, not just caring about people, but caring about people in a long-term kind of way. So this is having like a long-term perspective. We're moving away from things like enabling people in ways that are like short-term, easy ways of making things work, to like what's going to be best in the long term for everyone. Like if to the Stoics the long-term goal is eudaimonia, or flourishing, living a good life guided by your values, I want to succeed, but I want you to succeed too. I want all of us to live in a place where we can have like joy and happiness and connection and safety. And then there's this impartial fairness component as well, which I would argue it touches on compassion. I might try and make that argument as we move along throughout the day. But there's this idea about like, I'm going to be fair with myself. I'm going to be fair with you. This justice to the Stoics isn't Texas justice, which is a very different idea. But justice to the Stoics is this idea about like, I'm going to be fair. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to do right by you. Within Stoicism, there was this like group of there's this kind of, oh, someone's going to call me out on that. I would say within Stoicism there was kind of this idea about cosmopolitanism. So cosmopolitanism is this idea about we're all interconnected. So oikiosis is this word to talk about how you and I are interconnected, where essentially the word household means like we have like a natural affiliation or affinity for each other. So the way that the ancient Stoics might have thought about this is they might have drawn out a series of concentric circles, and they might have said, so here I am, me, Scott, and then out from here, here's my immediate family. And then out from there, there's my neighbors, and then my city and my countrymen, and further and further and further out. And there's this idea that, you know, just like ripples in a lake, we're all interconnected, right? So what's happening in the next town over is happening to people who are connected to me, is happening to me. No man is an island. Across different ideas, religions, philosophies, there's this idea about the golden rule that keeps coming up. This idea of you want to treat people how you want to be treated, not treat people how they treat you. So I'm not going to match your energy, as the kids might have said. Oh, that's like 2 or 3 years ago. I'm so bad with the hip lingo, but I'm not going to try to match your energy. I'm not going to like give you what you're giving me, but I'm going to give you what's right. That's this idea about justice. Although I think in a more technical sense, what the ancient cosmopolitans would say is, I'm going to try and treat people better than they deserve. Meaning, I'm going to give everybody each ring you go out, everyone gets kind of a +1, right? So I'm going to try and treat my immediate family as well as I treat myself. I'm going to treat my neighbors as well as I treat my immediate family. I'm going to treat everyone who lives in this city that I live in as well as my immediate neighbors. And I'm going to try and give everyone a little bit better than like their station might deserve for them, because I want good things for us. I want there to be a strong interconnectedness, because that's good for all of us. I had to put this screen grab because I love this, but we quote in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, right? There's the enlightened ones, Bill and Ted, and the enlightened ones have the fantastic wisdom which changes the world, which is be excellent to each other. And that's essentially what the Stoics are arguing for. They're saying, really just be excellent to each other. Be excellent with yourself as well, but be excellent with each other. So how does this really relate to this idea about love in general? So the word love is used in meditations about 40 times. I didn't do the quote on this. I have a citation later for who did the counting for me, which is fantastic. Which is more than the word virtue as mentioned in meditations, right? So love is one of the most common themes that would come up. Ryan Holiday would say that, you know, the common good or brotherly love is the most cited part of or component in meditations. This at least 40 times is a count by Donald in a previous talk that he did. Here's a quote from Seneca talking about the view of love within Stoicism. He says, "No school has more goodness and gentleness. None has more love for human beings, no more attention to the common good." And this is really interesting when we think about the talk this morning, right? When Dr. Glenn was talking about Seneca's views on love and marriage, where it wasn't this like overly codependent idea of like, I am incomplete and I need you, and if I could just get you, then I'd be complete. And my purpose in life is like finding someone to like to fill this hole that's inside of me. But instead, I want to live a virtuous life with somebody or without somebody. If I end up getting into a relationship and it works and it's a good one, that's great. A relationship that's deleterious is not better than no relationship. So I can be okay in or without, but if I get into a good relationship, we can lift each other up together. And we look at that idea here, right? No school is more goodness, gentleness, love for human beings, no more attention to the common good. We can see this idea, right? This attention to the common good, like this mature love for human beings, right? We're not focusing on infatuation. We're not talking about like a drunkenness on each other. It's good to have these romantic feelings, but the purpose of your life still needs to be focusing on living a good life, where you're focusing on what really matters, which might be making a difference in some ways that makes the world a better place. Okay, just a little bit more. Hang with me. I know I'm so excited about these things. So this is a quote that's commonly attributed to Seneca. Just to be a little bit of a stickler, when Seneca says that he's actually quoting, I always say Hecate, but I'm sure that's Hecate. But Hecate was one of the ancient Stoics. All of the writings from him is lost. But this is a very influential quote that Seneca says, which is, if you wish to be loved, love. So if you were to say, what is the Stoic view of love and connection? This really gets at the heart of it. So you think about the golden rule. The golden rule is treat people how you want to be treated, not treat people how they're treating you. So even as Socrates would say, it's better for someone to do wrong to you than for you to do wrong to them. Like we're not going to let other people misbehaving justify our misbehaving. So if you want to be loved, the most important thing is to love. Which is beautiful. It's kind of like, when the Beatles say, in the end, the love you make is equal to the love you take, which hopefully we don't have to pay copyright stuff for that if we do edit this out. These are some remarks from Donald Robertson. Previously gave a talk on this, and they fantastic. You can't see the link. I had the link buried, but it got changed with the reformatting. If you just go to his website and look up the 2014 Stoicism and Love Conference, you can find it very easily. So here's some of his takeaways, which I thought were just so good and worth repeating. Sometimes it's better just to cite somebody and say, this was smart, I agree with it, instead of trying to rewrite it in my own words. So the Stoic ideal of wisdom and virtue definitely include loving others. Because I would focus on courage, right? But wisdom and virtue definitely include loving other people. The sage, so Dr. Gloin this morning talked about the sage as this idea about someone who's really self-actualized in a way that is probably really unrealistic to become. But if there is someone who's obtained sagehood, they would love others and seek friendship. So sagehood doesn't mean detachment from other people. There isn't this idea about you need to let go of all your attachments and then you can receive enlightenment, and then that's the path towards nirvana within Stoicism. There's this idea about, okay, we're all in this together still, and even if I become the sage, I don't lose my desire to be connected to other people. I also don't lose my recognition that it's good to have connection with other people. Right? We're social beings. It's in accordance with nature. The Stoic sage's love is unconditional. It doesn't require reciprocation. So if you have times where you're not living up to what I would hope you'd live up to, I'm not going to start shortchanging you, in a sense. At least from my love for you, which would be indifferent for the Stoics. This is not up to us. I can't control how much. I can't control what you do. I can control what I do. This sort of love is inherently realistic about the transience of external things and the mortality of those you love. So if you're in a relationship with somebody, they're going to be imperfect, right? If you're my poor wife, right? She's been married to me for 20 years, right? I have so many shortcomings, and I try, but I still will make, challenges. I'm still just annoying. I still can't put the cap back on the toothpaste. But it's realistic to say I'm gonna love you from how I think somebody should be loved. I'm gonna give you what I think is right instead of trying to get into some economics about this. So Donald would say this love is fundamentally rational, meaning it's consistent with reason and it doesn't lead to irrational behavior. And I think that's a key question that we still need to think and talk more about. Because as you're reading this, you might be thinking a little bit about type C personality that we talked about earlier, right? This idea about people who are people pleasers and they're always giving and they're never taking back. You might say, well, what if you're giving unconditional love to somebody who doesn't really appreciates you or takes you for granted? So not just someone who's imperfect, but what if somebody who's ungrateful? Or when Helen was talking about abuse, right? What if somebody was abusive towards you? Is the idea that you have to stay with that no matter what? I think these are questions to consider. Absolutely. When we think about tolerance, right? We think of, this question is further reinforced by this quote from Marcus Aurelius to himself, where he says, "How many unkind people have you been kind to? Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Remember, nothing belongs to you but your flesh and blood, and nothing else is under your control." So there's this idea about keep your own side of the street clean. Don't worry so much about what other people are doing. First worry about yourself, right? If you're focusing on somebody else having a mote in their eye, make sure you don't got a beam in your own eye first. Absolutely good advice. And of course, I'm sure everyone is wondering, Okay, but like in a relationship, does that mean you have to stay no matter what? Does that mean that that there's no limits, that there's no place where like you have to put up with it? This is something to consider. Absolutely. When we think about how does this look from like modern Stoicism, of course, as a therapist, I think modern therapy is modern Stoicism, which is my own bias, and I know that that's a blind spot that I have. But Aaron Beck, Albert Ellis, two of the most important thought leaders in modern cognitive behavioral therapy. So Dr. Beck writes a fantastic book called "Love Is Never Enough," which is a fantastic book if you're looking to say. What are some good relationship skills I can learn to make relationships work better? As a couples therapist, I've never had a couple come in where the problem was they didn't love each other. If that's the case, usually people are just splitting ways. Usually if someone's coming in for couples therapy, it's, I love this person, but they drive me crazy. I love this person, but like things are really bad. We think about like, is there enough of the good and is there too much of the bad, right? So we're trying to kind of work on both. So this is focusing on how do we manage the negative parts of what's going on. Albert Ellis had the very romantic statement of the art of love is largely the art of persistence. If it's like your 25th wedding anniversary, definitely don't get up and say that. That would be a pretty unromantic thing to say, but it's good to hold in your heart. It's good to recognize that love is really the art of persistence, right? Because there is, it's a messy thing, right? I think if you're in a long-term relationship with somebody, it's like this constant pattern of falling in love and then rekindling that love and having it fall away and bringing it back up, and it's a messy time. So these CBT people, this isn't like a really like romantic and idealized way of thinking about love, but essentially they're saying, look, love isn't really the problem. The problem is everything else. The problem is the way we communicate with ourselves and the way we communicate with other people. And we got to slow down and work on these things. In Stoicism, we have this practice we call the view from above, right? Where you would imagine yourself at Mount Olympus where the gods are, looking down and seeing the situation from that perspective to have a better idea about what's going on. Good couples therapy is really like that. You're trying to help the couple disengage from this argument that they're stuck in and both come up to the view from above together and be able to look down and say, okay, well, now that I see what's really going on here, like, what are we really dealing with and how can we really work on improving the situation? Which is very practical. We have a lot, I think I'm actually too short on time to spend a lot of time on this, but in our chapter, we focus on like very practical interpersonal skills. This one is focusing on essentially learning to be more assertive and going after what you want in a way that's balanced and has good respect for yourself and other people. Or so if somebody was more in that kind of type C camp or more of a people pleasing or difficulty with being under assertive or over assertive, how do you focus on being respectful for yourself and other people? But I think this is the question that we're pondering, right? This is kind of a stay tuned and like a check us out kind of thing. So this question of if we're charged with being tolerant with others and strict with ourselves, is there room for boundaries? Is there room for leaving? Is there room for self-preservation? Is there a time and space to rebalance, repace, and perhaps exit a relationship? Casey and I are exploring this in a way that's like virtuous and fanciful and enjoyable, and it's a fun time. But we have a podcast going on the Rescuer Trap. Check it out if you're curious about this specific question. We are coming at this from every angle, trying to understand it.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was excellent. And early on, you had said something about, this is just noise when you were talking about ACT, and it made me think. At what point? Because sometimes CBT, ACT, and it all kind of overlaps at some point. But I'm like, at what point does ACT just come right back around to REBT? Because as soon as you said that, all I thought of was Albert Ellis. This is all just noise, and it look up a video on Albert Ellis and you'll know what I'm talking about. He speaks just like that. He's brass tacks kind of guy. But
yeah, it is. There is in therapy. There's this tendency of it's like a pendulum, but it's also like we're constantly reinventing old ideas, like old wine in new bottles. But I mean, you saw that with Helen's talk, right? So if we were to go back in time, like 10 years, like boundaries was super exciting. Everyone was talking about boundaries, and then we kind of overdid it. Now we're like, oh, okay, actually, like you need to like reconnect with people, and then we're gonna. If you were like an author or a publisher, you'd look for the next series of books. It's going to be how do you reconnect with people. and then maybe that'll overdo it, and then we'll come back to boundaries. And it's all about, the Stoics moderation and temperance exists for a reason.
Yeah, you got to blame those pesky millennials for making boundaries so hot. It's all about boundaries.
Well, it's the
Okay.
algorithm is the problem. But
Yes, yes, it always. All right, thank you so much, Scott. Oh, I'm so sorry. All right, next up, we have, well, relationships are a multifaceted topic. I want to mention that. And this is the friendship portion. And as I said at the beginning of the show, there is an accessible handout that Dr. Gregory Sadler has provided, that if you go to the Eventbrite page under the About This Event section, you click that link. It is not imperative to have the handout, but it's very nice. It does go hand in hand with the talk. It's a nice takeaway. Thank you so much, Dr. Sadler. And Dr. Sadler is a philosophical counselor who teaches philosophy and produces accessible resources for Reason IQ and the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. He'll be discussing how difficult is it to find an I always trip this. You know what? I'm going to bring you on to say this word. I've had to
Aristotelian?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, how hard is it to find an Aristotelian friend? Is the title, right?
And how difficult is to say that. I apologize, everyone. Dr. Sadler, you have the floor.
Thanks. And as a matter of fact, I'll just mention that there's another Greek-derived word that I trip over all the time, and I'm going to say it hopefully right, magnanimity, right? Every time I have to teach about it, and I've been doing it for 20 years, I'll wind up mangling the word. So let me jump right in. I'm going to discuss this key distinction between three different kinds of friendship that Aristotle makes, and talk about why that distinction might seem to make genuine friendship problematic, difficult, something daunting for us. And then I'll talk about how the distinction can be helpful for us, really helpful when rightly understood. And I'll bring in some really short considerations from a few later thinkers, including Cicero and Seneca and Plutarch. So this distinction between three different kinds of friendship, very, very influential, massively important idea, which becomes essentially a commonplace in ancient and medieval philosophy after Aristotle. And he's making it in Nicomachean Ethics, Book 8, where he distinguishes friendships into three main types along the lines of the good that the friendship is based upon. So what is it that we're actually looking for? So at the lowest level, there is what we call friendships of usefulness or utility. And then we have friendships of pleasure. And then we have friendships that are characterized in a couple different ways as being about the good or the beautiful or the noble, or where we love the person for who they actually are. And these are the reasons why we love or like the other person, and why we have this mutual wishing well or good to them. I do want to point out that Aristotle's treatment is actually a lot more complex. He does distinguish other kinds of friendships and relationships. So there's unequal friendships where there's two different bases. For example, one person is getting usefulness out of it, the other person's getting pleasure. We're not going to worry about those. He also talks about familial relationships, for example, parent to child or spouses to each other. And there's an additional basis there, which is really well exemplified in our saying, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your relatives, right? And he also talks about other ways we might be associated, like sailors or war comrades, people who belong to the same neighborhood, people who participate in the same religious guilds or dining clubs. So we're going to put all that aside because we're going to keep it nice and short here. Why is this distinction so important? Why have people been captivated with it? Well, it turns out to be really helpful for thinking our way through a lot of the controversies or confusions that might arise about friendships and relationships. And some of these are, we could say theoretical. What is friendship itself? How many kinds of friendship? How can we order them? These are general matters we're trying to understand, but it's really, really useful for our practical lives because we get ourselves into all sorts of confusions and make mistakes when we can't make these distinctions well. And I think that was just as true in Aristotle's time. That's why he starts out Nicomachean Ethics with these questions. Some people think this, others that. It's just as tricky back then as it is now, maybe a bit trickier now. So in the three types of friendship, the most paradigmatic, that some people like to call ethical friendship, is friendship based on the good or the noble. And it's between people who are virtuous, people who are genuinely good people. And this is the fullest sort of friendship. The others, he says, are friendships by just analogy or likeness. So they're kind of like it. They have some of the features, but they're not truly friendship. And here's where it starts to get sticky for us, right? Because what's actually going to be the case, most of us are not going to really experience in our own lives and you know our own relationships that superb type of friendship. We can still recognize it, we can still desire it, we can still talk about it, but unless we're actually good people, maybe it's not feasible for us. So if we look at the distinction itself, let's start at the bottom. Everybody can enjoy these friendships of usefulness, which in Greek is to sympheron or to chresimon. And why do we feel affection? Because we're useful to each other. We supply some sort of need for each other. We don't even necessarily enjoy each other's company, but we do good things for each other. And some people might say, well, that's not really friendship at all. But Aristotle's willing to use that term, philia, to talk about it. Aristotle tends to be kind of a critic of old people. He attributes this sort of friendship particularly to them. He says in old age, people don't pursue pleasure but profit. Maybe if Aristotle had lived as long as Seneca, he wouldn't say so many things about old people because he'd have more experience. But he also says younger people can be like this too, if they're what we call users, right? They're motivated in life by gain rather than by pleasure. And it also includes these things that were very important for the ancient Greeks, family ties of hospitality, which they called xenike. Many of you are probably familiar with that. So that's the lowest level, right? Everybody gets to have those. And then we have friendships of pleasure. And these are based on the pleasure that we derive from each other or with each other. So it could be that I get pleasure from you. Or it could be that we do some pleasant activity together, like we like to watch a TV show together. And he says this is very common for young people because they guide their lives by emotion and pursue what's pleasant to them. It's not as durable as a complete, genuine friendship, though. Why? Because our pleasures change over time. And so as we, mature, like when we're little tiny kids, we think candy is the best thing. And then we go through puberty and now we're suddenly got some real other drives on our mind. And then, maybe we move on to other things. And so, these are an important part of life for Aristotle. Pleasure is a genuine good for Aristotle. It's just not the good, the best thing possible. And so, he gives examples like the lover enjoys looking at the people that they're attracted to, the beloved, and the beloved likes getting the attention. But when the beloved's beauty fades, the lover no longer gets that pleasure and the friendship can break down. So when you're not getting the kind of pleasure that you would want in the relationship, Aristotle says it's okay for it to dissolve. It makes sense. And he says these friendships are better than friendships of utility. They have a similarity to friendships based on virtue or the good. So let's jump to that then. The best kind of friendship, the real deal. And this is going to be based on to agathon, the good, or to kalon. He talks about people valuing and loving the other person for their own sake, not just for what they provide or in kind of an accidental way. And there's a catch to this, though. In order to have this kind of friendship, it's only accessible to people who are actually good. And as he says, those who are similar in virtue. And that's why they're able to have this really deep connection with each other, because, they're kind of naturally attractive to each other. They're also pleasant and useful to each other, so it encompasses those. And he talks about this kind of friendship as being perfect, teleia in Greek, and being very permanent and combining all the things that a real friendship ought to have. So, this kind of friend, as he says, has been tested, so they're trusted. They're not likely to screw each other over. They have all of the characteristics needed in what he calls true friendship. The Greek there is hos alethos, in the real or true way. And I do want to point out an interesting side note before I talk about why this is so problematic. Aristotle actually talks about friendship between husband and wife. So I think we could extend this to other committed romantic relationships as being based on natural drives, wanting to, have sex, for example. And that this is a way of combining a friendship of pleasure, enjoying, romantic life together, but also usefulness. You live together, you're useful to each other. But he says that it could also develop into a friendship of virtue. So it's not like romantic relationships are just pushed off to the side and you can't, you pick or choose. You can have a real friendship or you can be involved with somebody romantically. There's room in Aristotle for a romantic relationship developing in that way. Now, here's the problem. So there seem to be some difficulties in developing this best or most genuine kind of friendship. And one set have to do with the people themselves. So if I'm going to be in that kind of relationship with you, I've got to be a good person. And I have to not be fooling myself into thinking I'm better than I am. I need to be genuinely virtuous. And so do you. You also have to be that way. And I have to not lie to myself or sucker myself in thinking that you are virtuous when you're not. So that's already tricky, right? That's already eliminating a lot of candidates. There's also a contingency to friendship. Friendships, we have to wind up in the right place at the right time. And then it takes a while to develop. Aristotle has that famous line about eating a bucket of salt together. So, spending time together. And they're kind of vulnerable to chance or fortune. And there's no guarantee that if two genuinely good people wind up together and spend time together, they could decline. In Nicomachean Ethics, Book 9, he talks about this question, well, what if your friend changes and becomes no longer a really good person? So when you hear that, you might be like, well, this sucks. It's a wonderful idea, but how am I ever going to have this? Now, there is some usefulness to this. I think it's really, really helpful to not confuse lower friendships with higher ones or to imagine them to be the better kind of friendship. It's all too easy for people to mistakenly think that friendships of usefulness or pleasure are more than they really are. This happens all the time with romantic relationships. People get involved. They're really enjoying each other's company, but they're ethically challenged, let's say, and they think that they're better people than they are, and that this relationship has to be much more durable, and they lock themselves into something that's not a real genuine friendship of virtue, but just a facsimile of it. And Aristotle would say, no, cut the ties. It's better to go see if you can actually improve yourself. I think one of the ways to really address this, and this is what's going to get us to the later thinkers, but there's also room for this in Aristotle, is to think about, okay, so if we have to be virtuous, how virtuous do we actually need to be? Aristotle is not committed to a view that you're either vicious or virtuous and there's nothing in between. There's a lot in between. And it is possible to make progress in virtue for Aristotle. Some people like to talk about this doctrine or thesis of the unity of the virtues, but that's not actually in Aristotle. That's people injecting that, drawing a little bit on Nicomachean Ethics, book 6, and ignoring everything else in the Nicomachean Ethics, where he's clear that you could actually be a just person without necessarily being a temperate person. So we don't have to possess all of the virtues, I would say. We don't have to have them developed completely to, the absolute heights. Aristotle thinks of virtue as something that we develop over time through work, through repetition, commitments, choices, maybe even through screwing up and like learning our lessons and then, coming back and doing things better. So if you look at it that way, then I don't think it's quite so dismaying of a prospect. How hard is it to find an Aristotelian friend? Well, it depends on how you look at virtue. If we have a more realistic conception that Aristotle is advancing of what it is to be a good person, that might be helpful. And I think that a clue lies in the Eudemian Ethics in Book 7, Chapter 2, where he says that this best kind of friendship involves what he calls mutual purpose or commitment, antiproairesis. So it doesn't mean necessarily having the virtues fully developed, but it means recognizing them, valuing them, wanting to make progress towards them. And the three thinkers that I've picked out, I think, help us to reinforce this. So Cicero, one of my favorite thinkers, particularly on this matter, in his book on friendship, which is taking Aristotle's ideas and going further, he says that we should look at things as they are in the experience of ordinary life, not as they are in imagination or hope. And what kind of character do we need? So he gives us kind of a listing. We want people who act and live so as to give proof of fidelity and uprightness, fairness and generosity. You want to be free from base desire and caprice and insolence and have some constancy. And he says, let's call those people good. And he says, we need to interpret the word virtue by a familiar usage of everyday life and speech, not applying what we might call hyper-academic standards of what he calls the learned. And so this would let us include good people like Cato or Scipio, who Cicero looked to as good examples of that. And he's saying we need to lower the bar for what we're calling virtue. So I think that's helpful. Seneca has all sorts of great stuff to say about this. I'm just going to pick out two of them. In letter 3, he highlights how important it is, if we're going to call somebody a friend, we have to trust them. And don't call them a friend if you don't actually trust them. So he says, I would have you discuss everything with the person who's your friend, but first of all, discuss that person themselves. And then he makes a reference to Theophrastus, who, by the way, is arguably Aristotle's Aristotelian friend, his good friend and companion and then successor. Theophrastus said, a lot of people go wrong because they judge a person after they've made them their friend instead of making them their friend after they've judged them. So don't just jump right in. I think that's great advice. We should be willing to criticize each other and say, you're not being virtuous now. In letters 9 and 109, Seneca will say that the Stoic sage, and now, you want to talk about virtue being like brought up to that super, super high bar, the Stoic sage is that person. The Stoic sage will not need a friend, and this has been mentioned earlier, but they will desire and choose to have friends for a variety of reasons, which include having blind spots themselves that a friend can help fill in. So I think that's a really great idea there. And then Plutarch, two works of his that I particularly like and often teach. One is called On Having Many Friends. And Plutarch says, well, you actually can't, not in the true sense. But he does actually tell us something really cool. He says that true friendship seeks after three things above all else. And notice how he's like rolling in these Aristotelian distinctions. Virtue is a good thing. Usefulness is a necessary thing. Intimacy as a pleasant thing. And now notice two things about this. We've got all these rolled in together. That's one thing. but he says it seeks after these things. He doesn't say that it has all of these things. It's a constant, like, continual process of work. He's also got this amazing discussion called How to Tell a Flatterer from a Friend, which I think is incredibly relevant for our own times. And he stresses the importance of the Delphic maxim, gnothe se autou, know thyself. If we don't want to be taken in, if we don't want to be suckered by people who will exploit our better, impulses, we need to root out self-love and conceit, because those flatter us beforehand, and then they make us more susceptible to flatterers who come from outside. So what should we do? We carefully review our own nature and upbringing and education. I would say in our own time, we'd say, like, look at our traumas, right? And how these fall short of true excellence, how we're not at the height of virtue. And he says, if we actually do pay attention to our own shortcomings, we will be looking for our own, we'll detect our own need, not of a friend to constantly commend and extol us, to say, oh, you're such a wonderful person, but a friend to take us to task, to be frank with us, and sometimes to criticize us, to say, you're screwing up, man, you need to do better. So I think when we look at Aristotle in a more realistic way, and then we see what later thinkers did in the shadow of Aristotle, that might be quite helpful for us. And that's all that I've got for this. Hopefully this puts some ideas in your head. And if you ever have been dismayed by looking at the discussion in Aristotle and you're like, oh, how am I ever going to enjoy this? Maybe you feel a little less daunted by that. Oh, I see a remark from Donald. Dr. Greg Sadler is my friend. That's very nice. And I was telling somebody earlier today that you're my friend.
Love that. I love it. Love everything. Dr. Sadler, this was such a delight. I mean, my favorite thing about hearing you talk is you love what you're talking about so much that it's just such an engaging process. I just really enjoy it. And I like this, of course, as like a therapist and someone who's kind of Socratic, I love how you bring it down to this question about, like, not like virtues as like all or nothing, but like how virtuous is good, like how good is good enough. You don't actually have to be perfect. And the goal isn't I'm going to become perfect and then find a friend, but like I'm going to find someone that I trust. I'm going to find someone that I think I like the cut of their jib, and we can kind of grow together. That's great.
I'll say one thing very quickly. I don't want to take up too much time because I know we're a little bit off.
Yeah.
So what you said about loving the stuff that I talk about, that's completely correct. And I sometimes say that I'm in sales and I have a really, really good product. So if I just don't screw up in presenting it, it'll kind of sell itself.
I don't know. I feel like both can be true, right? As a dialectician, there's going to be truth in both perspectives. So. Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us. This was lovely. I am so happy that we had you. I get the opportunity to also introduce our next speaker, so I'm going to pull you out. So we have Michael Fontaine, a professor of classics at Cornell University, author of How to Get Over a Breakup and Guide to Moving On, is going to be talking about his and as well as Ovid's insights. The title track of the same book. He's going to be talking about how to get over a breakup, Ovid style. Welcome.
Fontaine, I'm happy to have this chance to speak with you today. I'm going to be speaking about Ovid. And so I'm going to begin by sharing my screen so you will have something to look at while I speak. So here we go. All right. This is how to get over a breakup. That's the subject of my talk today. As you can see, by the way, there's a QR code down there on the left. If you scan that, it'll take you to a web page for this book I did. And there's links to all kinds of stuff, including summaries of the book that I'll be talking about toward the end. So here we go. In the year 1 CE, so right around the time Jesus is being born, the Roman poet Ovid published a short self-help poem titled Remedia Amoris, which translates to Remedies for Love. Now, this poem is both practical and hilarious. It's a blend of a little wisdom and a lot of wit. Although many ancient philosophers wrote works on managing emotions, Ovid's poem stands out as the only bona fide how to get over a relationship guide that we have from the ancient world. As I'll explain, Remedia Amoris is packed with coping strategies and insights that are borrowed from the different schools of Hellenistic philosophy. So as you know, in modern psychotherapy, we have competing schools of thought. In the same way, ancient Rome had competing philosophical schools, like the Stoics, the Epicureans, the Peripatetics, and so on. All of these had different therapeutic advice for life's woes. So for that reason alone, I expect Ovid's ancient breakup advice is going to appeal to many of you listening today. But that's not all. There's much more to Remedia Amoris than a pedigree of philosophy. It's a treasure trove of timeless heartbreak advice served up with a wink. So let me give you a little background. I'll start with the basics. Remedia Amoris is a sort of, but not really sequel to an earlier and much more famous poem that Ovid wrote a couple of years before. This is it here. This earlier work is called Ars Amatoria, or The Art of Love. Now this one on the left is a tongue-in-cheek 3-book guide on how to fall in love. In The Art of Love, Ovid poses as a professor of love, semi-seriously teaching Rome's young men how to find and keep a girlfriend. And in book 3, he even gives the women of Rome strategies to find a man on their own. So he offers comedic yet practical tips on seduction and romance. Now, when we get to Remedia Amoris, though, that sort of flips the script. While The Art of Love is all about falling in love, Remedies for Love is all about climbing back out of it. So this symmetry masks an important change of perspective. So in the earlier poem, love is portrayed as something desirable and good, a beautiful, warm hug, romance. But in Remedia, love is treated as an affliction to overcome. So in this case, in Ovid's view here, love's sickness is like an illness. It's a wound of the heart that requires an antidote. Over and over, he uses terms like morbus, a disease, or witium, like a blemish, and woolness, a wound, to describe being painfully in love. Accordingly, he offers a catalog of cures. In fact, Ovid prescribes 38 distinct real-world strategies for coping with a broken heart or unrequited love. Now, at times in this poem, he even speaks in the voice of someone who has recovered from love addiction himself, very much like a former addict who has turned counselor and knows the struggle firsthand and now wants to help other people through it, him or herself. So before we dive into the strategies, it's worth knowing a little bit about Ovid's perspective on love as a whole. If you have ever heard of Ovid before right now, it's probably because of his masterpiece poem, The Metamorphoses. Now, Metamorphoses is a Greek name. It means changes of shape, and it's a grand epic of mythological tales. Most of the stories, or at least many of the stories in it, involve someone transforming into a new form or a new shape, almost always with love as the catalyst, or lust as the catalyst for this new change. And in narrating these myths, Ovid explores the psychology of love in all kinds of amazing and surprising and sensitive ways. And he does a lot more. He's very clever, by the way. He even hides the Latin word for love, which is amor, inside that title right there. Do you see it? Take a look. That is the kind of poet Ovid was. He is constantly playing games, playing word games, and seeing connections everywhere. Ovid actually did see love everywhere he looked, especially in the city of Rome, right? Because Rome, for him, is the city of romance. Romeos were all over the place, and so were Rome-grown beauties. Ovid wanted to help all of these people. So that brings us to those 38 recommendations in the Remedia Amoris. These are strategies for the brokenhearted. Now, some of them are sincere, and some of them, especially as you go on, are so outrageous or hilarious that Ovid is surely joking when he recommends them. So that's it on the background. But the takeaway I want you to have from my talk today is this. Ovid didn't just philosophize about love. He didn't just wonder, sort of like in Plato's Symposium, what is it? Where does it come from? He wants to give concrete advice. So we have these 38 practical tips for coping with love when it's at its most painful. When you ask somebody out and they don't want to go, or you love somebody with all your heart and they don't love you back. So in the short time we have, I'm going to sample a few of these tips and show how some of them resemble strategies you might hear from a therapist today. For example, Ovid's first 6 suggestions are mostly sensible and straightforward advice. They are exactly the classic kind of tips you're going to find in any modern breakup survival guide. Take a look. First one he says is keep yourself busy. He says literally never have nothing to do. Now, Ovid insists that you should stay occupied at all times. This is an absolute classic recommendation. Don't just sit around the house moping. Get up, go out, do something productive or something fun, and that'll keep you safe from spiraling into sadness. Now, what could you do? Well, one thing you could do is focus on work or focus on school. Ovid says literally, go out and fight on campaign wearing a toga downtown. You say, what? What does that mean? Well, in plain English, that means go become a lawyer. Back then, in ancient Rome, training in law and training in oratory were the prime career track for ambitious young Romans. So sign up for law school. Or in modern terms, if we generalize, throw yourself into your career, throw yourself into your college studies. Pouring energy into personal advancement can distract you from heartache. Recommendation number 3, he says, heed the call of duty, and he's not talking about the video game. So if a legal career is not an option, Ovid's next idea is for you to go join the army. Now, in his days, Roman soldiers got posted all across this massive, sprawling empire. There were new adventures, new challenges, and new people in all those places. And as the saying goes, getting shot at tends to focus the mind in a way that nothing else does. So that might help. What else can you do? You say, I don't want to sign up for the army. Okay. He says, get back to nature. This is recommendation number 4. If you don't like the courtroom or you don't want to go off to war, Ovid suggests farm life. In essence, he's telling you what? What do they say today? Touch grass. Leave this city, get out of the city, get out of your neighborhood and the chatter of urban life and go do some hard work outdoors. Trade your dating apps for dirt under your fingernails. The fresh air, the physical labor, and the visible progress of tending fields or flocks will give your mind a healthy rest. What else could you do? You could take up an outdoor hobby. Now, this is how he frames it. Ovid writes, Venus has often turned tail and shamefully fled after Diana prevails. In other words, the goddess of love or sex, that's Venus, often flees when the goddess of the hunt, Diana, wins. So what he means is a new outdoor pursuit can chase away thoughts of love. Now, in Ovid's time, he had in mind activities like hunting, fishing, or catching birds. Remember, nobody jogged or lifted weights much for fun in ancient Rome. That wasn't something they did too much. So today, this could be as simple as joining a soccer league or a softball team. Go on hikes, maybe train for a 5K race. You could get out there and see your local running group that seems to be filled with singles. The point is to meet new people, break a sweat, distract your mind with fresh challenges. Plus, if you're busy hunting new game, you might just forget about the old flame you were chasing. That's the kind of joke Ovid likes to make. Or recommendation number 6, he says, get out of town. Take a long trip far away. Maybe go on that canoe trip to Australia that you've been thinking about doing for a while. So this is basically what? The age-old wisdom of out of sight, out of mind. Put some physical distance between you and your source of your heartache. So Ovid believed that living in the city of Rome or getting out of any town for a while is going to dull the pain of love that's gone bad. Okay, so these are sort of classic recommendations, and you'll hear them today, and it's maybe not surprising to see that they haven't really changed at all in a couple thousand years. But there are some things, even with the passage of time, that have made these recommendations even more poignant today than they would have been not all that long ago. So here's the way to think about it. Ovid's ancient advice to get out of town, what did he mean? Well, 2,000 years ago, if you were a lovelorn Roman, you couldn't just get away from your ex. So if you lived in the city of Rome, you were bound to run into that person again in the forum or the marketplace or walking down the street or around the corner. It was going to happen. Now, amazingly, our hyper-connected world of today presents a similar problem. 25 years ago, which is not all that long ago, you actually could just pull up stakes, move to a new city, start a new life, and genuinely leave somebody behind. There was no internet, long distance phone calls were expensive, so that was it. You can't do that anymore. You can unfriend your ex if you like, but thanks to social media algorithms, you're going to keep seeing their face and their friends and their brunch photos and all the rest popping up on your feeds for months or even years. So in a very real sense, the digital age ensures that reminders of our ex are never far away. So if you've ever wished for a breakup witness protection program, you're not alone. And Ovid's ancient advice, out of sight, out of mind, feels even more relevant than it did, 20 or 30 years ago. It's going to be hard to do. So as Remedios Moris goes on, Ovid's recommendations become less obvious than this, less commonsensical than this, and they become a lot more surprising, or in some cases, a lot more cheeky. I just, in a couple of minutes, want to look at a few of these with you. Here's one of the most interesting. One is it's about channeling resentment. So at one point, Ovid essentially advises for you to turn your heartache into anger. Now, that's not going to sound very stoic, but he illustrates this by speaking in the imagined voice of a scorned lover. It sounds a little bit in Ovid's language like this. So here we are. We've got our angry lover, and he's thinking to himself, she got that, she got that, and she's not just happy with stealing that. That gold digger, she's forced me to sell my whole house. And that's when she swore we'd meet up. That's when she went back on her promise, leading me on all those times, freezing me out at the door. Oh, other men, well, they're just great, but she's too good for my loving. He says, hell, the delivery man gets all the nights that I don't. So what's going on here? As we see, Ovid's channeling the mindset of a guy who's been badly burned in a breakup. He's very bitter. He's bitterly recounting all the slights and the losses he suffered in the course of dating his lady love. He lists everything that he gave the woman and everything she accepted, every promise she broke, how she led him on and then shut him out, and even how she's happy with other men while he's left with nothing. In short, he's nursing a growing grudge. If you have ever had a friend endure a nasty divorce or a one-sided breakup, you've probably heard this kind of talk. Maybe you've even caught yourself thinking this way after a relationship went sour on you. What do? You tally up all the dinners, the vacations, the gifts you spent on somebody who didn't really appreciate it. Now that all adds up and it really can sting. So Ovid understood something here fundamental about human nature. A lot of our misery and heartbreak comes from the harsh realization that what? That love is a kind of marketplace. And our so-called market value isn't static. In fact, our market value is highest on the day we're born. You think about it. As a newborn infant baby, you get unconditional love from your parents. And it stays like that, ideally, as you're growing up. Our parents cherish us, nourish us, hug us, kiss us. It's wonderful. But as you start to grow up and you venture out into the dating world, you discover that the romantic marketplace is nothing like the cradle. The dating scene is wildly competitive, it's critical, it's arbitrary, and it is unforgiving. Rejection is common, second chances are rare. So that's the first time we've really learned what it means to feel unattractive, to feel unwanted, to feel unloved. Even worse, you discover that money and status can factor into how lovable we seem. And to add insult to injury, you discover that love is not a straightforward transaction. So you can pour what? You can pour time, money, and emotional energy into a relationship, and you can end up with nothing in return. Because what? Paying for dinner, that doesn't entitle you to affection. If it did, we'd call that prostitution, not love. So there's not a schedule of prices when it comes to this stuff. So thoughts like this can lead to a lot of bitterness. And that leads us directly to one of Ovid's more cynical pieces of advice in this poem. Essentially, his 8th strategy for getting over an ex is to embrace that bitterness. Yikes, I bet you're not going to hear that from your therapist. Ovid says, deliberately dwell on every way your ex has wronged you and everything you sacrificed. In Ovid's own words, he puts it, fixate on all that you lost, fixate on all that she cost. There's a little rhyme in the Latin. In other words, make a detailed mental inventory of all the time, money, and love you wasted on that ungrateful so-and-so, and let that resentment simmer. If you can successfully convince yourself that your ex was a heartless gold digger who took advantage of you, then your lingering love will harden into anger. And, Ovid implies, that anger will help you get over that person faster. Now, Ovid lived 2,000 years before Sigmund Freud. So he wasn't thinking, he could not have been thinking in Freudian terms. Nevertheless, I'd like to suggest to you that Ovid intuitively nailed a very powerful psychological coping mechanism here. Telling ourselves, hey, I was the innocent victim and my ex was just using me, that's a classic trick our minds play to protect us. It shifts the blame and the loss onto the other person, and it cushions our ego, it protects us. In modern psychology, we might even call Ovid's tactic a form of projection. Projection means what? attributing your own unacceptable feelings or insecurities onto someone else. You think, oh, a person who can't face the shame of being rejected will project thoughts and decide, well, actually, my ex, she or he was the awful person all along, not me. In our case, the jilted lover projects greed and shallowness onto his ex, convincing himself, oh yeah, she never really loved me, and she only cared about my money all along. So this is the story our lover tells himself, unfair as that may be to his ex, to protect his ego for the psychological defense, to insulate his self-esteem from the brutal truth of unrequited love. So this one here is just one of many insightful and sometimes tongue-in-cheek strategies Ovid offers in this poem. In fact, throughout Remedia Amoris, Ovid shows an intuitive grasp of several mental maneuvers like this, not just projection, but he explores how denial and several others are tools that can ease a broken heart. So let me sum up briefly. Let me be clear. Let me be crystal clear. I am not suggesting that you literally follow all of Ovid's advice. Certainly not the part about joining the army or cultivating a permanent grudge. Some of Ovid's 38 so-called remedies for love are serious, sensible tips, but others are outrageous on purpose. Ovid knew they were bad ideas, and he suggests them with a wink. He wants you to have a little bit of fun with this. So my goal in sharing them with you is to show how remarkable it is that a poem written 2 millennia ago can still sound so psychologically sharp and relevant to our experiences today. So if you want to have a little bit of fun with this, scan that QR code and find the list. There's a link to the list of the 38 recommendations. Get together with a friend and go over a few of them. See what you think of these different ideas. And in the best spirit of Stoicism, do it now before heartbreak strikes. That's the classic advice of every ancient philosopher, because when it hits, it's too painful to deal with it then. So enjoy Ovid's wit as you explore his advice. Many of his so-called cures for love are deliberately over the top or humorous, so you might find yourself laughing just as much as you are learning. Thanks very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Professor Fontaine, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. It's so helpful, so informative, but also like very entertaining, kind of funny. I like it a lot. We are very lucky, right? So our next speaker, we have Dr. Leah Aguirre, who is a New Harbinger author. She wrote a book called Is This Really Love? Promo code right here. Fantastic. She is a psychotherapist, co-owner of Cove Counseling Group in San Diego, specializes in treating childhood complex trauma. She's a certified EMDR therapist. Here's a promo code for her book. Check it out. I'm following her on Instagram as we speak. But we're excited to have her. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I'm going to share a little bit about my work and focus supporting individuals overcoming emotional abuse and really helping to discuss help you recognize the nuance behind every story. So this is both from a therapist and a human perspective. So yeah, Scott just shared a little bit about myself. I'm a therapist and certified EMDR therapist. So for most of my career, over 10 years, I've worked primarily with individuals overcoming and working through trauma, especially complex trauma and attachment-related trauma. And this has become a fixture of my work, which is why I think it's important to talk about emotional abuse as a type of trauma, and we'll get into it in a little bit. But I am excited to be here and share a little bit about me. Before I go into my work and helping you all understand really the nuance and complexities of emotional abuse, I'm going to share a little bit about my story, because I do share this in my book, and I share this in my content as well as with coaching clients. And I share my story only because I feel like so many people go through this type of relationship and don't really have words or the language to explain what this type of relationship is and what it looks like. So for me, I dated this person back when I was 18. So I was basically a kid, a young adult. We dated for a couple of years on and off. And back then, this partner was controlling, jealous and critical. But at the time, being a young adult, a child, I didn't really have the language or awareness to recognize that relationship as being emotionally abusive and that partner being an abuser. Also, if you look at that lens, I'm in college, we're all drinking, couples are having these like horrific fights. People are just pretty immature developmentally. So again, kind of normalizing the behavior, like it's not a big deal. Really, I always tell coaching clients, I didn't see it for what it was, right? Years later, again, I'm a therapist of over 10 years. We reconnected, kept running into each other. And I really hadn't thought much about this person. He had reached out to me and apologized. And I had believed we'd both grown and changed. And I hoped things would be different this time. And of course, the same old patterns resurfaced. However, it was a little bit more subtle and nuanced. There was some growth, right? This person was 10, 12 years older than when we first started dating, but not a whole lot of growth. And I just want to go into kind of the nuance of this, because for a lot of folks in these dynamics, it's not always explicit or overt. So my abusive ex, in my book, I call them emotionally abusive partners, EAPs. He criticized me for everything. I always say for everything I did and everything I was, my food preferences and diet, taste in music and hobbies, how I cleaned, how I organized my home, my friends, my career goals, my work, the writing I did, very critical of it. And we'll go into why this impacts someone, where it feels like each instance doesn't feel super impactful, but when it compounds over time, it really erodes your sense of self. In this relationship as an adult, I was walking on eggshells. Again, not very conscious of it, but really afraid of saying the wrong thing or talking about certain subjects, certain sensitive subjects I would avoid completely. I didn't feel really truly safe in this relationship. So I was always anxious, and I wasn't really connected with my true, authentic self. And at the time, and something this is important and we'll talk about a little bit later on, is I was fine. I say this in quotes, but I wasn't. I had regular chronic headaches and migraines. My period became irregular. I know this might be too TMI, but this is so common in individuals who are going through these types of relationships. Digestive issues. So my body was ultimately shouting at me, we're not okay. But I was in denial and avoiding the reality of it. And I kept trying to rationalize his behavior. And then there was a breaking point. And this is what I talk about in my book. We were at dinner on vacation, eating chicken wings. I don't know if you all eat chicken wings, but it's messy, right? Like, I don't know anyone who eats them well or clean or with a lot of tact. So I'm eating my chicken wings. We're having a decent time. It's actually like the only time of the night I felt kind of finally relaxed and like grounded and enjoying myself. He goes, has anyone ever told you you're messy and that you lick your fingers when you eat your chicken wings? And he goes on to berate me and tell me he was worried about taking me to work events, afraid that I would embarrass him, that I wouldn't make the right impression on folks around him. And that was the moment that everything clicked, because I was like, if I can't even eat my chicken wings in peace with my partner and just be and exist and like be human, nothing would ever be good enough for him. And I actually ended that relationship right then and there. I do think there was some helpfulness in me dating him prior, because, I only at this point dated him again for a few months, but this is over 10 years, 12 years where the same patterns of behavior were showing up, right? So he's a full grown adult, same behaviors are happening, right? But it took a while for me to really understand the relationship and the dynamic for what it was. So, I use a self-assessment with clients. I keep it in my book. It's a self-assessment. And I just use this for folks to pause and check in with themselves when they're maybe questioning the health of their relationship. So the first question, I can be myself with my partner without fear. Yes, no. I can express my thoughts and opinions freely with my partner. Yes or no. It's all yes, no questions. I'm comfortable communicating and expressing my needs to my partner. I can make mistakes around my partner without judgment. I feel accepted by my partner. I feel seen and heard by my partner. I can change my mind with my partner without consequence. I can set firm boundaries. Someone mentioned the millennials and boundaries. This is so true. But I can set firm boundaries and limits that will be respected by my partner. I can do things independently from my partner, and I feel respected by my partner. Now, this is really, again, the whole purpose of this self-assessment is for someone to just pause and focus on their inner experience. Oftentimes in these relationships, we're living in chaos and we don't have the time to truly pause and check in with ourselves and how we're feeling. So, before diving into abusive relationships, it's important to know what makes a relationship healthy. Before we can identify what's harmful, we need to know what what's healthy, those green flags, right? We talk a lot about red flags, interestingly enough, without talking about the green flags. So a lot of the work I do is psychoeducation to folks about what's green flags, what's healthy. I use the Duluth model. It is a model from the Intimate Partner to Violence. And I can't remember the company name. I can share it later, but it's a model that was adapted to help folks in identifying unhealthy or abusive relationship dynamics, as well as healthy and recognizing when their relationship is healthy and equitable. It's a really great model. So they have a healthy equality wheel, and they have another wheel that is for the red flags, power and control wheel, it's called. And I use that in a lot of my work as well, showing it to clients. So when we're talking about healthy relationships, this all might feel obvious, but oftentimes we don't really think about it. I don't know anyone who was sat down as a youth or child and explicitly said, this is what makes a relationship healthy. You may have witnessed or observed healthy relationships growing up, but nothing was explicitly said to you, most likely. We have sex ed. I taught sex ed briefly. It's all about consent, but what's interesting is we're not even talking about safety and what makes you feel comfortable consenting to something, because oftentimes when there's fear, we can't consent, right? So we are coerced into a situation. So it's so important to understand what makes a relationship healthy. So sense of safety, feeling emotionally and physically safe. Your body feels calm. You can exist in the relationship without fear. And this is so important because, again, seems obvious, but in a lot of these relationship dynamics, when you're walking around like holding your breath, feeling like I'm going to set this person off, or I'm going to get in trouble, or I'm going to start a conflict, that's something that becomes so normalized. Shared responsibility, a partnership, both parties see one another as equal and active participants, and you both have a responsibility to be kind and respectful. And then open lines of communication. You feel comfortable sharing your thoughts and feelings freely without fear of judgment or consequence. I also want to make note that this applies to all relationships. The work that I do is typically around romantic relationships. I also do a lot of work around abusive parents and family members. But this book is really for folks navigating romantic relationships that are abusive or with partners that are emotionally abusive. But this can apply to all relationships, friends, bosses, mentors. I see this a lot in dynamics where there's a power differential, right? So any authority person can abuse that relationship and that person within the dynamic. And then again, true accountability. So both parties make a conscious effort to repair and change their harmful behavior. If it's human to make a mistake and to maybe say something that you didn't mean to be offensive and it hurts the other person's feelings, as long as you take accountability and make that conscious effort to repair, no problem, right? We're not perfect. But the idea with abuse too, and I'll get into it, it's a pattern of behavior. So even if you shared with your partner, hey, that hurt my feelings, or when you criticize my food choices, I feel insecure, and they continue doing it, that's the problem, right? They're not empathetic, they're not engaging in perspective taking, and they're seeing themselves as an authority. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. You respect one another's autonomy. So you respectful of the other person's identity and right to self-determination, including personal boundaries and limits. And there's a culture of kindness. And again, that feels obvious, but you're supportive of one another and loving and caring. And you go with the intent, you go into the relationship with the intent of, I care about this person. They care about me. I'm going to do my best to treat them with kindness, right? It's not always conscious, but that's how it should be in a healthy dynamic. So I also talk about relationship rights. In a healthy relationship, you again, kind of reiterating the same things. You have the right to feel safe, the right to change your mind, the right to own your needs and communicate those needs, the right to personal time and space, the right to your own identity and autonomy, and the right to have your own feelings separate from your partner's. This is the big one that comes up. So we can talk a little bit about abuse now, but abuse can be understood as any act or behavior that asserts power and control over another person and infringes on their rights and autonomy. And again, it's a pattern of behavior. So it's not just a one-off, it's not just a moment, but it's a pattern of behavior used to assert power and control over another person. It's not an issue of communication, it's about control. I always tell folks, if there's an abusive dynamic, it's so inappropriate and potentially unsafe to go to couples counseling, right? Because it's not a communication issue, it's not a breakdown in communication issue, it's simply about control and power. Another thing about abuse, it can vary in frequency and severity. And there are different types of abuse: physical, emotional, psychological, financial, and sexual. For the purpose of today, we're just talking about emotional abuse, but these can also go hand in hand, right? So you can be in a relationship where there's both physical and emotional abuse, or physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, and financial abuse. Okay, so I describe emotionally abusive relationships as being like a cult of one, because they don't often start off as abusive, right? Typically, my clients will share things start off great, almost too good to be true. And then things start to shift and change. And you start noticing, once the courting's over, an effort to control, manipulate, pressure you. So there's explicit and overt abuse, and there's more subtle and covert abuse. Some people get frustrated using language like subtle or covert because, some of these behaviors I'll talk about aren't truly subtle. But again, if you don't have any frame of reference, you don't know what's abusive, what's healthy, what's normal, what's not normal, these things can be very subtle and feel harmless at the time. And oftentimes emotionally abusive relationships involve coercion, and I describe it as emotional pressure and controlling behaviors. So subtle abuse what's again, subtle, and I'm saying in quotes, but with subtle abuse, it's usually more difficult to detect and nuance, right? So it starts off pretty gradual and snowballs over the course of the relationship. And each incident itself is granular. So it doesn't seem that bad, but again, when it compounds, it really erodes you. It destroys your sense of self, your self-worth. It becomes another means of asserting power and control. Again, it involves manipulation, coercion, and it's harmful. But it's hard to see when you're in it, similar to cults, right? Nobody joins a cult. I'm just using this as an example. Nobody joins like a cult or a high demand religion with the idea of this is going to hurt me. Usually you have hope and you are excited and you see the good parts and you see community and you see love and you see connection. You don't go into it with this idea of I'm going to be abused or this person's going to hurt me, right? That's how I describe it that way, because there's so much shame around being in these types of relationships. So examples of subtle abuse is constantly criticizing you, judging you, attacking your lifestyle, your beliefs, your values, your interests, your friendships, relationships. Again, it's not just making a joke here and there. It's constant, and there's an intention to harm you, to make you feel bad, to put you down. Another instance of subtle abuse is invading your privacy, demanding that they take over your phone, look at your bills, maybe not allow you to close the door when you're going to the bathroom, or when you're, home from work, you want to decompress. Maybe they insist on being in your space. It could be isolating you from family or friends. And again, this can be subtle, like you spend too much time with your friends, or that friend's not very good to you. I don't know why you're friends with them, right? And so it's a slow but gradual process, usually, at least initially. It could be blaming you for their reactivity or their anger or their outbursts, giving you the silent treatment, making baseless accusations like you're cheating on me, or dictating your appearance and or behavior. So lifestyle could be like your exercise routine, it could be your diet, but dictating these things, oftentimes they pose it as like, I care about you, I want what's better for you, this is healthy, this is better. I hear this a lot too. I just want you to be safe. So if you dress like that and your bra strap shows, just as an example, you may be unsafe. Someone might get the wrong idea and they might harm you. So oftentimes it's phrased in a way of being caring for you when it's really manipulative. Discouraging you or preventing you from accessing mental health care or support. This happens a lot with folks that walk into my therapy space. Like, I don't see the therapy helping you. You're just becoming, when I work with folks and we start to kind of tease out these behaviors, there's usually backlash with their partners. Like, I don't think it's working, because these clients are starting to assert themselves and put boundaries. A lot of body shaming happens, violating or pushing back on your boundaries. You set limits, they push back or they totally disregard them, using threats or guilt trips. And threats isn't necessarily physical, but it could be threatening to leave you. It could be threatening to, tell your friends about something. It could be a guilt trip, like, if you really loved me, you would stay in versus going out with your friends. Another form of subtle abuse could be creating financial dependency. The term love bombing is pretty common, but the idea is you mesh your lives, including your finances, and it makes it harder to leave, right? And then invalidating your feelings and experiences, just to name a few. There's a lot more, but these are some common ones I see in my practice and some of the ones I experience personally. experienced. It's important not to make assumptions. And I could do a whole talk on this. Not all abusers are narcissists. There's too much pop psychology right now labeling folks as narcissists or being narcissistic. Though many show narcissistic traits, they're very egocentric. They're very emotionally immature. They don't know how to self-regulate. They fear abandonment. So that's just something to note. Not all relationships also follow the textbook cycle of abuse. So not all of them might have this like distinct love bombing period. Abuse can occur in dating. It can occur in friendships or even family and workplace relationships. Again, a lot of the work I do is around emotional abuse within romantic relationships, but it can occur in all dynamics. And just because someone else's story looks different, it doesn't mean that yours is invalid. And this is so important because I have a lot of people coming to me being like, I think this is abusive, but maybe it isn't because I know this person who's going through this, or maybe they experience abuse in childhood. They witnessed abuse between their family members. And so what they're experiencing isn't that bad. Okay, so this is really important. It's important to talk about the role of trauma. Again, I go back to my cult example because it's very similar to when you're in an environment like a cult. When you experience repeated emotional harm or fear in a relationship, your nervous system becomes overactive and your brain and body go into survival mode. And that's like all the time. So there's changes in biology. Overactive amygdala, for example, increase in stress hormones. The amygdala is that part of our brain that, helps with that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And then we have these trauma responses. So we have the chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, depression, feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, distorted thoughts like self-blame and mistrust of others. And why it's difficult to leave is really important to talk about because, again, it's not always explicit. It's not always easily recognizable. And it may not fit in one's mental schema of what abuse looks like. Additionally, it can feel familiar. So, if you've seen similar patterns in your childhood or in past relationships, it just might feel like the norm. This is what a relationship is. This is what it looks like. And then this is, again, another topic I would love to go into if we had more time, but normalization of abuse and power and control dynamics, which is often reinforced by cultural values, family systems, and gender norms. So again, normalization of abuse and power and control dynamics is huge. I see often in my work that this person who's abusing their partner is not being held accountable in other areas of their life. So it's also normalized and there's a lack of accountability. And then also self-blame and internalized beliefs. It's my fault. I'm too sensitive. These are trauma responses and they can erode your self-worth. So you start feeling like I don't really have, I don't have the self-efficacy I thought I had, or I'm completely reliant on this person, or they know better than me. Again, these abusers usually become an authority to you. And it leads to low self-esteem and distrusting, kind of going into that one's own perception of the relationship. So healing and readiness. Leaving happens only when you're ready, not when other people think you should. I really wish there were more therapists that wanted to do this work. I think it's really hard because you really have to just, walk with your client, meet them where they're at, convey non-judgment, because it's not their fault. They've been, I use that reference with brainwash. Their brain's been rewired. So it's really hard to think that they have the ability to leave. And it sometimes requires planning and preparation, especially when your lives are enmeshed and you become isolated. Or sometimes leaving or ending a relationship may not be an option if you, again, share finances or you're completely financial dependent. Sometimes if you share children, it might feel like that there's a lot of fear for folks in having to navigate that in the legal system and losing rights or, parental rights and not having to see their kids. So they choose to stay. Various feelings may arise. I always say that sometimes you experience conflicting or seemingly conflicting feelings like grief, anger, nostalgia, relief, shame. And then what's important to know is trauma-informed therapy and modalities can really help. That's why I love EMDR. It really helps to, I always say it's like a bunch of necklaces all knotted, helps to tease out those little knots and work through it so you can kind of free yourself from those negative core beliefs that are usually reinforced by these relationships. Parts work therapy or internal family systems and attachment focused therapy are also great modalities to help folks navigate and heal from these relationships. Self-empowerment after abuse, something that I really encourage with clients and that I had to do myself personally, was clarify and reconnect with your core values, identifying what truly matters to you, what you may have neglected during the time of the relationship. Again, when you're in this relationship and you fuse with this partner, it's really hard to have an identity and sense of self outside of that relationship. So really going back to the things that matter to you, that bring you joy, and finding ways to honor these values that may have been disregarded by that partner. Practicing self-compassion. Healing takes time, so trying to speak to yourself with kindness and patience and understanding, and do the things your abusive partner told you not to do is one of my favorite things to tell my clients. Really reclaim your autonomy and joy by choosing you. So I always say, like, go to the places they didn't want to go, wear the clothes that they didn't want you to wear, pursue the goals that they were discouraging you from pursuing, and connect with the people you were discouraged from having relationships with. So I always just say, like, reclaim your life, the life that you had before, or maybe the things you thought were never possible and the things they reinforce as not being possible. And so something to think about as we wrap up, and I use this again with clients that are exploring the status or the health of their relationship. Again, my job isn't to tell you that your relationship is abusive. Of course, if there's a safety concern, I'm always direct, but I want folks to come to their own understanding of what the relationship is and how it impacts them. So I always ask my clients, and if you're contemplating a relationship, not even with a partner, but a friend or family member, how do you want to feel in your relationships? And then focus on how you're actually feeling in the relationships we're considering or we're trying to assess. And that's the question I encourage with folks, and to also just pause and think about this. So if you want to stay connected, you could visit my website. I actually updated the website name. It's just my name, leahagirrelcsw.com. My group practice, and that's based in San Diego. We serve all of California. It's covecounselinggroup.com. You can email me, and you can follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram, also on TikTok, but I don't love TikTok. Leah Aguirre, LCSW. And I appreciated you making time for me.
Leah, thank you so much. I love the message about taking back control of your life back, thinking about what are all these rules I wasn't allowed to break before.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do the opposite of that. Well, acting opposite. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, I'm so happy to have you. So our next talk, we have our hostess with the mostest. We have Casey Pierce is going to be talking about I Can Fix You, the CB paradox, right? So Casey is a co-author with me. She co-wrote the book Stoicism Workbook from New Harbinger, which, by the way, the code from Leah probably works on all New Harbinger books, and you could probably try it out on our book if you wanted to. We're also currently working on The Rescuer Trap, another book with New Harbinger, subtitled A Guide to Overcoming Codependency, Compulsive Helping, Relationships, and People Pleasing. So I'm excited. She told me what the title is, and I'm like, what are you going to talk about? So let's jump right in. I think, are you muted?
Oops. Yeah. I said, what are we talking about here? All right.
Have
Let's
fun.
get into it.
I'm on standby.
All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. All right. Hi, I'm Casey Pierce, and I am here to make you uncomfortable. Now, don't worry, it's the fun kind of uncomfortable, the kind that might make you rethink your last 3 life choices. Okay. It's not the beefcake hour, but for a time, there was a hugely popular social media trend that you might have even participated in, where the task was to post a video featuring images of the celebrities you had a crush on in your youth. The playful joke, the viral punchline, if you will, is that your significant other turns out to be very much unlike your idealized poster worthy childhood crushes of yesteryear. I, however, came close enough. Yet, if I reach far, far back into the archives of my memory, past the teen idols, past the sparkly movie stars, I can remember my very first crush, the one that set the stage for all the relationship patterns I'd spend the next 20 years trying to undo. The first crush is a staple in pop culture, American pop culture anyway. He's an icon. Yet, if you asked his so called friends, they would tell you he wasn't very popular. In fact, they would tell you he's more of a wet mop, perpetually failing, and a real blockhead, if you will. Of course, I'm talking about this guy. Charlie Brown, the guy who wears his anxiety on his shirt, the guy whose kite always gets eaten by a tree, the guy who never ever gets to kick the football. Oh, and young Casey just loved him. And if you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I love Charlie Brown too, or maybe you're thinking, I'm dating Charlie Brown, or maybe, just maybe, you're thinking, oh gosh, I am Charlie Brown, then this talk is for you. I'm here to talk about someone that many people may know. Maybe I'm here to talk about you. If I am, I want you to know this is 100% that this is a very common behavioral pattern in relationships, trying to fix the other person, or staying in hopes that with enough influence, emotional energy, enough nagging, they'll eventually transform into the idealized version of what you want. If you've ever been in that situation, I want to know you are not alone. I absolutely promise. So, this whole project, this relationship built on future potential, is an act of conditional love. We use that word a lot, unconditional, all the time, don't we? Oh, my love is unconditional. But that doesn't mean that we're deeply infatuated. It means there's no strings attached. By definition, to love unconditionally means I love you despite any condition. I take you as you are today, in this moment, complete with the wet mop moments and the failures. The opposite is conditional love. And that's where the if comes in. Sort of a logical gap here. Oh, here we go. So here you go. If I could just get them to therapy, we'd be okay. Or to church or their moms. If there's a big if, then that's what conditional love is defined by. And you don't want that kind of love. You want a quality love. You want a lasting love. You want a fulfilling love. Okay, so yeah, so the logical gap. Someone who loves unconditionally might say, I love them, but if they, oops, I should have just stayed here. If they could just get it together, or they say if they would just go back to school, if they could just stop doing that one thing. And the question they never stop to ask themselves is, what does get it together even look like? Have they defined it for their partner or for themselves? The other question, and the one we often ignore because it's just so damned inconvenient, is that what they want? Because logic and reason tells us this. If they're a grown, fully capable adult, which we assume they are, and they haven't reached your version of what having it together looks like, well, they're not going to. They are operating exactly as they intend to. And there's absolutely no facetiousness when I ask this next question. Who are you to tell them who to be? That's a valid question, and one that I can answer in one word. Rescuer. You are a rescuer, or that's how you see yourself. You're not exactly a rescuer, you are engaging in the act of rescuing. Because I want to be clear, this is not your identity. This is a behavioral pattern, and it's a pattern you can put down. Because you cannot love someone into being someone else. There are not enough thoughts, prayers, inspirational quotes, or Facebook posts insisting that you two are wildly happy to get them to change. There's also not enough years in your combined lives to wait for this moment. Humans are complex beings. We don't train them within the context of relationships, and relationships shouldn't be social experiments or projects. So how do you know if you're in a fixationship? So let's go over some of these irrational core beliefs that are fueling this behavior, the stories you may have told yourself. I can fix them. I'm the only one that can. It's a beautiful but dangerous delusion. If they would just change this one thing, the one thing fantasy, then we would be perfect. We'd be happy. We could just forge ahead and do the thing. If I leave now, I will have wasted all of that time and effort I've already invested. The sunk cost fallacy. I'm here to tell you personally, that's a self-imposed 5 to 10 year present sentence. I feel guilty. I will feel guilty or responsible if they fail or suffer after I leave. It's sort of the savior complex. If they change, it proves I was worthy and good enough to make it happen. That is the ultimate performance review. So let's reframe beliefs 1 and 2. We can rebuild and we have the technology. These beliefs feel true because we're emotionally invested, but they are often just smoke and mirrors. Here I'm going to rationalize and reframe these beliefs with to offer some truthful perspective. Let's start with the big one. I can fix them. I'm the only one that can help them. So the challenge question to that is, has their motivation to change ever truly originated from within? Or does it only spike when you threaten to leave or escalate the conflict? If their motivation is purely reactive, then you aren't a healer. You are their consequence. Next, if they would just change this one thing, the relationship would be perfect, happy. The challenge question to that is, am I in love with the person they are now or who I believe they could be? Because if it's the latter, you are dating a hallucination. You are dating the blueprint, not the building. You are hopelessly devoted to the idealized version of them. And the person you're with is forced to live in that shadow of that perfect imaginary person. And that's not fair to either of you. The sunk cost fallacy. This one trips everyone up. If I leave now, I will have wasted all that time and effort I've already invested. The challenge question, if I stay for another year, will that year be worth it? Or will I have just wasted more time and theirs? Sunk cost is not about the past. Think about it as a terrible movie, right? You buy the ticket, you watch the first 45 minutes, and it's just awful. Do you stay for 2 more hours just to justify the ticket price? No, because the money's already gone. That time is already gone. But you can save the rest of the night, or in this case, the rest of your lives. Here's the heavy lifting. I will feel guilty, responsible if they fail or suffer after I leave. The challenge to that is, am I responsible for their choices in their life? What would a close friend tell me about their responsibility versus mine? And what would I tell a good friend? We would never tell a friend they are responsible for another adult's entire life trajectory, yet we accept that crushing weight for ourselves. And finally, if they change, it proves I was worthy and good enough to make it happen. The challenge to that is, does my worth as a person depend on my ability to successfully change another adult? Is the goal to have a healthy relationship or to prove my value through a difficult project? Your worth is inherent. You don't earn it by winning a years long psychological tug of war. But my favorite challenging question to all these beliefs, the one that cuts through the fog of denial, the royal flush, as Scott Waltman once said, it's the golden question, is this. How's changing them or waiting on that change been working out for you? Of course, maybe it's not all bad. You have fleeting moments, little pockets of connection, little glimpses of that ideal person that you're holding on to. But a few fleeting moments does not equal a lifetime of happiness. People don't need to be bad or insufferable for you to leave. They don't need to be villains. They just need to be incompatible with the life that you want, the life that they want. Listen, as Aristotle says, one swallow doesn't make the whole summer. And there's a comfortability in unhappiness. Unfortunately, it's something we get used to because it means that at least you have each other. That comfort, that routine is what keeps you from challenging these core beliefs. Hearts never usually break evenly. But the fact of the matter is, you're not happy. If you're not happy, they're probably not either. And they've gotten used to the way things are too. The trouble is the comfort. We don't want to change because it means things are going to get uncomfortable. We fear the fallout. We fear the pain. It's a maze that leads you right back to where you were and nowhere at the same time. If you want a way out of this pattern, you've got to take a different route. But first, that means you're going to have to be willing to embrace pain. Seneca said, all those things at which are accustomed to that we are accustomed to shiver and tremble at are the tax of life. The fallout, the sadness, the temporary confusion, the loneliness of leaving, that's the tax. You can't live a full, meaningful, and emotionally honest life without paying the tax of pain and discomfort. You can try to evade it, but the tax collector of your mind is going to hit you with penalties. More years, more wasted years of potential, more resentment, more emotional debt. We often spend so much time in the fear of the fallout and facing the fact that we're incompatible that we rob each other of the time we could have spent living a fulfilling life apart. The longer we wait, the worse the fallout is going to be. I use the real Seneca since we're talking about emotional authenticity here. That's the real Seneca right there. All right. Epictetus gives us the final tool for dealing with this discomfort. He says in the Enchiridion to work to be able to say to every harsh appearance, you are but an appearance and not absolutely the thing you appear to be. Then he tells us to check if the thing that is bothering us is in our control or not. If it has to do with the things that are not up to us, be ready to reply, it is nothing to me. The pain of separation, the guilt that they might feel, the guilt that they might fail, these are just impressions. The feeling is real, but the judgment that the feeling is going to be the feeling is catastrophic, that the event will be catastrophic and life-ending evil, it's not that. The fact that your partner won't change, it's not your business. And that's what Epictetus is trying to say. It is nothing to you. That's what he's trying to say. Not that it means nothing, but that it is really not my business. The only thing you can control is your response and your own actions. Which brings us back to Charlie Brown. The paradox is that there was nothing inherently wrong with him. He was not broken. The fixer tends to unconsciously seek out people who are truly struggling, try to impose their own standards of perfection and success onto that person. They see the mess and think, I can organize that. But Charlie Brown, remaining loyal to his struggling, awkward, and kind self, actually models authenticity and emotional courage. He only came off as a wet mop sometimes because he wore his emotions. Marcus Aurelius did too. I mean, have you read the Meditations? He's pretty emo. Pretty sure he started emo. Most of us, however, wear our self-doubt and awkwardness on the inside. To be honest, if Charlie Brown wants to work on himself and change, he will. He won't do it for Lucy, he won't do it for his friends, and he won't do it for the fixer. Your judgment of what they need to get it together is rather indifferent and should be. What does make the difference is the way you take it. The struggle lies in being okay with the fact that you two are simply incompatible. Okay. It's unfortunate, but that's simply an impression. Of course, we may be disappointed that this is not going to work, but the most crucial question you can answer, the one that decides the whole of your life, is this. If you choose to stay, are you doing it for the love of who they are, but the sheer terror of finding out who you are without the project? And oh, I'm out of slides. That concludes my talk.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Are you rescuing for them or are you rescuing for yourself? I love this idea that like the problem wasn't that there's something wrong with Charlie Brown. The problem was that you were in love with like a different version of Charlie Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all this time about trying to squish him into someone else instead of recognize.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say, I can show you, you can be more than what you are. And then that
Right.
echoed in, and these relationships last for 4 to 10 years. And, you know, it's
like flipping a house, right? You got good bones.
Yes.
Let's give it an open concept instead of, yeah.
My relationships were many times an episode of This Old House. That lasted for almost a decade.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm out of here. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you,
guys.
Casey. Fantastic. Fantastic. All right. And now we have our keynote address. We have Professor Armand Dangour. He is a professor of classics at the University of Oxford, author of Socrates in Love and How to Talk About Love, an Ancient Guide for Modern Lovers. So exciting. His keynote address underlined the message of this whole conference, which is How to Talk About Love, an Ancient Guide for Modern Lovers. So I'm going to turn it on over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott, and hello, everyone. Yeah, so I'm very happy to finish up this series of talks and to talk specifically about the title of this conference, which is the philosophy of love and relationships. Because, of course, a lot of what we hear and think about when we talk about love is psychology. And you get a lot of psychological relationship issues, issues of communication or of attraction, or the kind of thing that we hear about from psychologists. But what do we actually mean by the philosophy of love? And I'm going to go back to the most ancient and the longest lasting of treatises on the subject of the philosophy of love. So Plato's Symposium, which has been continuously read for more than 2,000 years, is about love, but not about this kind of romantic love that we take for granted love means. What he does in the Symposium, written about 385 BC, is set up a conversation which is held by participants in a symposium, which originally meant a drinking party. And these participants happen to be all men. That is the cultural standard of ancient Athens. And they're all of different professions. So you have a tragedian who's the host of the party, you have a lawyer, you have a young aristocrat, you have a doctor, and so on. And then, apart from those initial 5 speeches from different people speaking from different perspectives, so one of the points about this philosophy is we don't know answers, we just have different perspectives. But after those 5 initial speeches in the Symposium, you get Socrates. So Socrates, Plato's teacher, a man for whom he had enormous respect, doesn't give us a theory of love that is his own, but he says it's one that he was taught by a very clever woman. And so the only woman's voice in the whole of the dialogue is the woman who Socrates voices, and he calls her Diotima. And he says she knew a lot about love and she had a doctrine, and this is what it is. So that's, you might say, the second section after 5 speeches by other men in the party. And then finally, a young man, a young charismatic playboy figure called Alcibiades bursts into the party. And the longest section of the dialogue is the last one, where he says, I'll tell you about love. And he essentially describes the man he loves, who is Socrates himself. So when we talk about the philosophy, the starting point of this particular dialogue is the young man Phaedrus, who says, love has never been praised. And when he talks about love, he's talking about the god Eros. So in ancient Greece, the personifications of the gods were considered equivalent to the actual feelings and ideas that their names suggested. So in the case of Eros, that means erotic love. So what Phaedrus says is, we should give speeches in praise of love. That sounds a bit strange when you put it like that. We should give speeches in praise of the god Eros. But what it really means is there's an assumption that Eros is a good thing, and indeed a divine thing, an assumption that love is something praiseworthy. So what the speakers have to show is, why is love praiseworthy and how is love praiseworthy? Which means that they're asking the question, what is good about love? Now that's a philosophical question. It's not like saying, how should we love? It's what is good about love? What is the thing about love? What is, we might say, what is love for? And of course, the word good immediately brings in an ethical component. Love isn't just about feelings. There's got to be some goodness in it. For the ancient Greeks, that was crucial. So what is good about love? What we then get is, in the first 5 speeches, I'm just going to talk about one of them, which is very famous, and that is by the comic poet Aristophanes. And he says, look, I'll tell you what love is. He says, originally human beings were double what we are now. And of course, this is a comic scenario that he paints. We had 4 legs and we had 4 arms and we had 2 faces on either side of our body. And we were roly-poly and we were terribly self-satisfied. And we threatened the gods. Whereupon the chief of the gods, Zeus, split us down the middle. So it's like a wire slicing through an egg. And then they sort of smoothed us around and we became 2 human beings instead of a single roly-poly double of a human being. And he said, but of course, as soon as we were split, we were desperately seeking the half that we'd originally been part of. And love, he then concludes, in comic vein, of course, is the desire for finding one's original other half, finding one's original complete self, going back to a sense of completion. Now, this is the closest thing we get to the idea of, in the philosophical statement, as it were, of love, to the idea that love is finding your soulmate. And it's something that is very seductive, and that modern readers of the symposium think, oh, well, that's the best thing about it, because, of course, that's what love is. It's finding your other half and having that wonderful feeling of completeness. But as we proceed in the dialogue, it becomes very clear that that is a completely unsatisfactory answer. And one of the reasons it's unsatisfactory is that if you are simply relating to something that is a mirror image of yourself, you're going to go nowhere. You are not going to grow and develop and be creative and do all sorts of things for which love is good, if you think of love in a much broader sense than that sense of supreme narcissistic self-satisfaction that you might get from being completed by having yourself, as it were, your mirror image, as part of that complete whole. And so after these initial speeches, which come from different directions of that kind, we get to Socrates' presentation of the doctrine of Diotima, this very clever woman who he said knew all about love. And he said, what Diotima told me was that love begins with physical attraction. And you are attracted to a body, and then you are attracted to a lot of bodies. And then you realize that actually you're attracted to the beautiful thing that's inside those bodies, and the beauty that all those bodies partake of. And then he says that love, you realize, can be attached to other things than bodies. It can be attached, he says, to things like institutions or countries. You can love your country. And then what we get is this extraordinary image of the ladder of love, where you go rung by rung. And he's not saying any of these rungs are dispensable. I mean, so you might have to fall in love with a body and several bodies and so on in order to go up the ladder. But eventually, he says that you realize that what you love is beauty itself. Now, that's a very highfalutin notion, that you can love the notion of beauty and goodness. That is something that Plato develops in his own philosophy. It's probably something Socrates, well, certainly something Socrates himself never thought. And is put into the mouth of this woman, Diotima, who is a fictional character, because she's effectively moving from the idea of physical love and attraction through up this ladder and through to a transcendent view that love is about some relationship with beauty itself, not something that human beings can easily relate to. But in the course of that, Diotima defines love and says it's creative. It's something that we're all pregnant, she says, pregnant in soul or body. In order to fulfill ourselves, we need to give birth either literally or figuratively. Now, obviously, women give birth, men don't give birth to real babies, but can give birth to ideas and philosophies and doctrines and thoughts. And Plato is specifically talking about that kind of creativity. So just as he sees the pregnant woman who is ready to give birth to a real child as being fulfilling what love is, having been attracted to the other body, you become pregnant and then you give birth. So he sees the idea of being attracted to another mind and becoming creative in relationship to that mind. So, I mean, this is something that is so highfalutin that even Plato himself, I think, realized most people wouldn't immediately consider that to be the answer to what is good about love, what is love for. So what happens is that he brings in this third and last section, the Alcibiades, this young, beautiful man, supposedly the most handsome man in Greece, who comes in and into the party, and he sees Socrates there, and he says, well, look, you're talking about love. I'll tell you what love is. It's this man right there. And the reason it is, he then tells a lot of stories about Socrates, how Socrates saved his life in a battle. So one of the other speakers earlier in the dialogue had said that love makes you noble. It makes you want to save the life of your beloved. It makes you want to die for your beloved. So picking up on that idea. And then Alcibiades says Socrates is actually not very good looking on the outside, but he is beautiful on the inside. So this idea that love looks beyond the mere physical to something that's deeper and more genuinely attractive in some way. And then he says that there was an occasion when he was fighting in a battle, and Socrates and he were sharing a tent, when he wanted himself to seduce Socrates physically, and Socrates wasn't interested. And this is a strange inversion, because you're talking about the beautiful man trying to seduce the uglier, older man. I mean, we have to accept a certain cultural background here, where in ancient Athens it was fairly well accepted amongst the elites, at any rate, that an older man could have a relationship with a younger man and also then go on and be married and so on. So within that, you're talking about an imbalance of a relationship where an older man normally would take on a younger one, and they might or might not have a sexual relationship. But in this case, Alcibiades is the younger man saying, I loved this man and I wanted to sleep with him, but he wouldn't sleep with me. And that's where we get the idea of platonic love. And the reason it's platonic is that it transcends the physical. Socrates was not interested, in fact, deliberately shunned the idea of sleeping with this beautiful younger man, even though it would have been perfectly possible for him to do so, because he cared for my soul, is what Alcibiades says. He cared for my psyche. So this is something that we find at the end of this dialogue is summarizing in many ways what the philosophy of love is about. It's about asking what is good and how will love make us a better person? How will I develop? Now, one of the things about that is that it requires an imbalance in a relationship, because if you fall in love with your mirror image, someone who's on exactly the same level as you, philosophically speaking, you're unlikely to get very far. It's going to be hard for the two of you to pull each other up. That's a moot point, I suppose. It is possible, I think, in relationships as we see them, that two people can be, as it were, on the same level. But actually, it's more likely, if two people in a relationship are essentially on the same level, that one will have, let's say, an area of expertise or of emotional intelligence that the other doesn't, and there will be some ability to help the other to improve and grow and develop. And that, I think, is what is going on here. This idea that you have an imbalance between two people, and that there is one sense, the one that has the ability to sense what the other is lacking and to fulfill something in that other person's psyche. So when we're talking about philosophy of love, you're looking at these kinds of relationships and structures, I think, rather than asking the question of how do I deal with this love affair, or how do I make someone stay with me, or something of that kind. And the kind of romantic love that we immediately associate with love is perhaps less, very much less to the foreground. So what is love then? I mean, what Plato has gone back to in writing this is a whole tradition in Greek philosophy and poetry of thinking about love and love's various ways of manifesting itself. And the final answer, insofar as there is one, is not going to be the high-flown love that is associated with Diotima's ladder of transcendence, But usually in Greek culture, the last word is the one that counts for the most. And here, Alcibiades' eruption into the party, and his statement that Socrates is the man that I love, reflects a rather lovely poem by Sappho. So the symposium was written in the early 4th century BC, and Sappho was the great singer-songwriter from around 600 BC, and she wrote a lovely poem actually in honor of a woman whom she loved. And it begins like this. She says, "Some say a troop of cavalry or marching men or ships of war is the finest sight on this dark earth. I say it's who you love." This proposition isn't hard at all to prove, for Helen, far the loveliest of womankind, forsook the best of men and sailed across the sea to Troy, without a thought for those she'd left behind, her child and husband dear. But unresisting, she was led by Aphrodite. So this poem is something that I think Plato appeals to, because in the end, the final analysis of the symposium is that love is who you love, as Sappho says. So the question this perhaps leaves one with is, can we see beyond the narcissistic pleasure we get from being in love with someone who makes us feel complete? Is it right that there should be some kind of ethical aspect? What is our love good for? What is it doing to me that is making me better? Is it right that that should be part of our philosophical understanding of what love is? And is it something that we can actually achieve in this life? So most of the time, I think we're busy having love affairs, falling in love, falling out, being unrequited, and all the rest of it. It's very hard to see beyond that and to ask ourselves, when I'm in love, when I love someone, when someone loves me, are we contributing to the other's growth, development, and you might say personality increase in some respect? Or is that not something that we should be thinking about at all? Or is it something that is beyond our ken? So that's where I would leave you with, can we love in the way that Plato would say love is important?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes I think that we are so caught up in being in love. We're like, what was the point of a relationship again? You had to bring out the best in each other. And,
yes.
Otherwise, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, we don't tend to think of that, but I think in a relationship, we will get to that eventually.
Yeah,
absolutely. It may not be how we get to, it may not be why we get together. And I think, in a way, that's another point that Plato is making. We may get together for all sorts of reasons, physical attraction or whatever it is. But in the end, if that isn't happening, is love really doing us any good? What's the point?
Yeah, after a while, you have to ask yourself, why are we here? We know what got us here, but why are we still here? That's wonderful. Scott, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I think about the way this kind of maps onto like neurobiology, right? So love, like in a chemical sense, usually kind of starts out more like affinity, infatuation. There's a lot of dopamine. It's like very exciting, a little addictive. But over time, like in a relationship, it shifts and it becomes more like calming, soothing, safe. And which is why like dating kind of changes, right? Marriage kind of changes, right? The things you do when you're first with somebody, or some things you do are different than what you do later on. But it kind of fits with this idea about maybe there's like reasons why it's exciting at first, but the goal is to not become addicted to like the first part of it. But the goal is to really focus on like what kind of person do I want to be in my life, and who can help me get there, and who can I help get to where they're trying to get to.
And I think the problem is that one does get addicted to that first bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's how one hops from, love affair to love affair. And, that's something that Plato talks about in one of the speeches. He says, you have to basically be committed. The right kind of love is committed. It's difficult again. It's an ethical choice whether you will say, I just want that thrill. And that thrill might be what Aristophanes is talking about, that getting together. but it's not going to last.
Yeah, what happens when the honeymoon is over? Because it's going to end.
You want the next one.
Yeah. Yep. Relationship hoppers, right? Because you keep looking for that next high, you know?
Right. And eventually you got to move to a new town. You've already cycled through everyone in this fishing pool. You got to fish somewhere else.
Are you calling someone a village bicycle? Anyways.
But I want to highlight, I love this idea about like, even if you're kind of on like equal footing with someone, usually there's some area that you excel at. And then trying to like kind of like learn from each other is kind of a very Vygotskian idea. If there's any like cognitive psychologists in the group, I love that. It's great.
Absolutely. Professor Danger, thank you so much.
Thank you very much
such an
indeed.
honor to end with you as the keynote.
Yes, lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Right. I have to scroll down and remove this. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. This was such a delight. And thank you so much to Scott for being my excellent co-host and dear friend. And thank you all so much again for the speakers for their valuable insights. Such a great discussion. And we hope that you know, as we wrap up, remember that the journey towards healthy relationships and self-awareness, keep it ongoing. Scott, did you have anything to add?
I would say I just really enjoyed how multifaceted, multi-perspective today was, right? I think even though we came at it from so many different angles, kind of the themes were the same, right? Which was focusing on really like what is going to be best in the long term. It seems to be kind of the overall thing that we're talking about. Where in the short term, there's exciting. In the short term, you know, there we might be avoiding things because of either like we're so focused on trying to get like short term enjoyments, or we're afraid of like short term discomfort. But what everyone is talking about is like true love, like in a long term kind of way, is something that's going to help you really grow as a person and have long term fulfillment.
Fulfilling love. Yes, you that's the key word right there. You just said it. Wonderful, wonderful. Such a great discussion. Until next time, guys, live well and love wisely. Oh, Hector, stop that now.